session is being recorded. As I said before, we've got some folks who are going into lockdown in Queensland now. So there's a couple of schools who couldn't make it who would really want to be here, but they're organising too many things to get up and running for the remote learning period, which hopefully will only be a few days in Queensland, but we'll see how we go. So I am recording this session for them. Welcome aboard, everyone. Thank you so much for giving of your time. We have a fairly tight agenda today, some opportunity for us to do some sharing, some opportunity for you to do some planning. So by all means, what I would love is for people to unmute when the time comes and to ask a question, or in the chat window. We've got Andrew on our team there who you can see on the camera, who's a learning delivery specialist, who is going to be there to respond to chat messages while I run us through things and bring things to our attention as we go through. But if there's something burning, some question you'd love to ask or some comment you'd like to make, then by all means, feel free to unmute and interrupt, and we'll keep it interactive for the session. So my name is Travis, and I'm the K-12 industry lead for Microsoft Australia, which basically means sort of like, you know, a subject matter expert for Microsoft in K-12 and TAFE at the moment. And so my background is 12 years in the classroom. I was an assistant principal of a large school in Victoria, which was the first government school in the world to roll out laptops in the hands of kids in 1992. And then also taught at university, at Monash University in the education faculty. So my background really is in education, and my role is really about helping school leaders and system leaders understand the potential of technology and emerging technologies for education. And so make sure that you've got those files ready, because we'll be using one of them before we have a lunch/morning tea break / whatever time it is for you. And we'll be working on some activities using some of those resources. So let's just start with what is this thing called the School Transformation Program. We know, based on lots and lots of research, and you know this as well, that really the 1 hour PD session after school for teachers to go in and have things told to them around technology use and expect there to be a change doesn't really work very effectively. And so when we redesigned our approach to this, we came up with this idea of having a longer PD professional development program, professional learning program, which touch different parts of the school audience. So leaders are obviously, we're here to talk about leadership-y stuff today. And leader could be principal, could be deputy principal, could be head of faculty or department, could be ICT leader as well. And so we're here to talk about the leadership part, but there are other parts of it. So today we're going to do this stuff where we're going to have a look at this thing called the Education Transformation Framework and step through a bit of what that means and what the origins of that are as a guiding sort of tool for us today. But then some of your teachers in your school will go through a pretty intensive program with people like Andrew and Amanda and Stephen and Troy, who are on our team, who are all former educators, who are all experts in how to use technology and integrate it into learning. And they will do a couple of day workshop with teachers in your school. So you don't have to attend that if you're you know, the school leader who's coming to just this, but just so you know what the breadth of the touch points are within your school. Also, the Inclusive Classroom workshop, which is about accessibility, about how technology can support students who have individual learning needs, whether it's something, you know, severe like visual impairment, or whether it's something like a mild processing disorder, or everything in between. And there's lots of things in the Microsoft technology that you've got which you may not know about. So it's about exposing you to some of those technologies, or the people who come to this workshop to some of those technologies, so that they can help support students and parents. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the day. There's also going to be an IT Pros Day, and that will be tailored from state to state, because obviously around certain parts of Australia, if you're in a Department of Education who manages the systems for you, then there's less decisions to be made. However, you might be an independent school where all the decisions are yours to make. So we will have tailored sessions, and you'll be invited to the most relevant one of those sessions so that you can get the most out of it. Because there's obviously that layer of technology that sits underneath, and then all of the tools and systems above that. And we want to make sure that the IT pros are also getting some training and also getting some support to set that up effectively. So there's different touch points across this program, and it will run over a few weeks, and then we'll continue on after that for lots of question and answers and bouncing back and doing additional learning and sharing resources, and lots of different things will occur. Our purpose today for the leadership workshop is really to think about, what's happening globally, what are some of the trends we're seeing, and there's some emerging trends happening as a result of what the world has gone through. But have a look at how technology can impact that, some examples and case studies from classrooms. Explore the possibility of what this might mean for you. Now, you might be at a school who's got a really strong vision for technology, and you're just sort of coming onto the Microsoft stuff and thinking this is a good place to jump off from. Or you might be a school who's really at the start of your journey. And both of those things can be met today, because when we talk about some of the visioning stuff and whatever, you just think about your own context and how you want to take your school forward. And the way we're going to do this is through a series of activities and what we'll call inputs from us. But this is the agenda. Sorry, it's in Australian Eastern, should be standard time. But obviously we're at 11 o'clock on the East Coast now, but if you're in Perth, just take a few hours off that. And we will go through, first of all, a bit of an activity. We're going to start your reflection, and we'll touch on that activity later on in the day. So that there's going to be lots of time when you're going to be actively thinking about what it is that your school can take away from this. How does this contextualize to your school? But there are also some inputs from us, because one of the things that we've experienced over many years is that sometimes, a school leader can't necessarily be the leader of technology in their school. And there's many reasons for that, like a massive amount of priorities you have as a school leader, and just technology being one of those things. And so it's important for us to show you some possibilities so that you can be dangerous enough to create a vision for what might happen in your school moving forward. So there will be some inputs from us and plenty of time for you to get active. And we'll do some stuff around, global insights and what we're seeing. We'll talk a little bit about what this learning experience platform is, which is how you could use the Microsoft stuff to create a really rich learning experience platform for students in your school. Then before lunch for me at 12:30, there'll be an activity, which is one of the handouts that you should have downloaded, and the links are in the chat if you haven't done that yet. It's the 3 documents at the bottom. And that will give you, I'll shut up and turn cameras and whatever off, and we'll do that before lunch. So you'll have an hour in the middle of the day there to do half an hour of planning, and then go off and grab yourself some lunch or morning tea, depending on where you are. And when we come back, we'll do some sharing and reflecting on that. At 1:45 my time, we will do something a little bit about devices and the impact of those on learning, but from an educational research and cognitive science perspective. And then at the end of the day, we've got 45 minutes where you'll do some further planning, and I'll scaffold that and run you through a series of activities for you to have something to take forward. My recommendation is that once we get down here and beyond, you can see that there's a series of workshops going on over the next 3 or 4 weeks. My recommendation would be that whatever you start today, you would bring that whole team together, because you'll have different teachers going to different things and your RT directors and things. Bring them back together and continue to work on that plan as your next step. So feel free to ask any questions as we go through, but we are going to soldier on. So first thing. Some people sort of are a little perplexed that Microsoft, sort of run these sorts of things from an education perspective and the educational technology perspective. But we do have many, many years experience in this field. And one of the things we did a couple of years ago was actually put some thoughts together in a book. And I'll give you a link to get that book in a second, a PDF version of it. But the reason we did that is because we always get asked, oh, come on, Microsoft, you must have seen a Department of Education who's good at something. You must have seen some schools who've really nailed whatever. And the answer is we have, and globally across all the countries we work in, there's amazing examples of what goes on in education around the use of technology. And so we put this book together as a sort of response to that, rather than send people 400 web links. And it's a pretty easy to read book. It's got lots of different research in it. It's got some policy red flags, green and red sort of say, yeah, do this, don't do that. That mistake's been made before. It's got things from experts like Bruce Dixon down here, who's kind of like the father of one-to-one computing, really. I mean, one-to-one computing, a device for every child, started in Australia in 1988. And he was a former primary school principal who basically worked on, after he was a principal, worked on a putting the first laptop program into a school at MLC in Melbourne in 1988, which then you could imagine what the technology looked like. And, battery life of an hour and a half was pretty successful. And a screen with more than 4 colors wasn't the reality. So we've come a long way. So you'll get some insights from people like him and Prakash Nair as learning architects, learning space architects, and other bits and pieces in that book. So the book is here. Let me know if that doesn't work, if that link doesn't work, because we had a bit of fruitiness, or Andrew might be able to fix that and put a different link in there if that doesn't work, mate. But there's one nice thing about being a PDF. We just don't have enough of the paper copies anymore to send around. Is that you can grab screenshots and things out of it and put it on slides or for discussions, or annotate and mark it up and write on it and do whatever. So it's actually quite nice to be an ebook, really, and it should be a fairly easy read. So feel free to grab a copy of that at some stage and have a bit of a leaf through. Obviously, there are huge possibilities of transformation. There's lots of different reasons why we might go on a journey to think about how technology is changing in our school, and it's about empowering students for the skills that they need for the future. It might be about learning spaces and using those more effectively than ever before. It might be about teacher practice, and we've seen a lot of change in some of these areas, as we'll talk about, as a result of the pandemic. But the challenge is that, as school leaders, there are so many different objectives that you have to work on every day. And, there's everything from budgeting and hiring. I used to manage HR for a school of about 150 staff, and it's a massive job. I mean, it really does take if it wasn't in a school, it would be a full-time job in a business. But we seem to do a lot of those collapsing of different roles into one person's job in education, out of necessity usually. And so there's all of these different priorities that we sort of have to deal with as a leader. And then when we think about leaders and the challenges for them in technology, one of the challenges is, of course, that competing landscape. How do I make sure that I'm staying focused on everything I need to focus on? Because technology is one part of it, but not the only part of it. What about professional development? What does that look like? And there's an opportunity today for you to share throughout the day. So we'd love to hear some great examples of schools who are in this call who are doing really interesting things around PD, because it is a challenge that many schools are facing. Tech readiness, which might be around, I think we spend a lot of time offering professional learning to our teachers, but sometimes in some schools we forget about the IT staff and making sure that they're skilled up with the latest readiness around technology, because companies like us and others just keep releasing new stuff all the time and it's hard to keep up. Lack of structure around what the PD looks like, or support for teachers in the classroom. Parents aren't brought into a vision, perhaps. How do we do that? So there's lots of different things that are real challenges for schools, generally speaking, and you may have nailed some or many of those. And so that's why we're going to switch to our first activity now. And we're going to get you thinking about what are the things that are going on in your school right now. So grab your sticky notes out, you'll need them, or a piece of paper if you don't, which you can just put some ruled lines across it, and we can just tear it up later on, because we do need to have them mobile. We're going to spend 5 minutes, and you can do this as a group if you're all together. You can do it on your own if you want. It's probably best to do it on your own, so it's your own thinking. But one idea per sticky note you're going to go with. So not lots of ideas. One idea per sticky note. You are going to write down what is something that our school is doing really well around technology today. There's some starters, some thinking starters down the bottom there, but it's not an exhaustive list, of course. It's the stuff you are doing really, really well with technology today that you think is worth celebrating and is some good stuff that you could share. So I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock and start a little countdown timer, and one idea per sticky note. Write one idea and then just put that sticky note aside, and we will use those for some sharing immediately, and then later on the day we'll use it for an activity. So I'm going to set the clock and shut up for 5 minutes. Any questions, just chuck them in the chat. Okay, 20 seconds left. Okay, time is up. Now, if you have multiple colors of sticky notes, don't worry about this next step. If you've only got one color of sticky note for the day, then put a little plus symbol in the top of each one of those sticky notes, because these are the positive things, the things we're doing really well, just so that later on when we do a bit of an organisation activity, you can delineate positives from opportunities for us to improve. We'll do that later on. So put a little plus symbol in the top of each of your sticky notes and just put them aside at the moment, because actually we're going to do some reflection first, so maybe keep them handy. So what we want to do now is I'm going to get you to share, if you want, some of these things, because we want to sort of get the wisdom of the crowd here of things that are going really well in schools. The way you are going to do that is you're going to type in Fred Bloggs College, I'm sure that's not your school name, dash, here's something we're doing really well. And we're going to do it via this link here. So you'll only have one sort of line of text. That's why I want you to put your school name first and then the comment. Just choose one of your sticky notes to share in, or a couple of them you can share in. But if you just open up a browser on your computer or your phone and go to polev.com/Travis Smith 027, then you'll come to a page. You can put your name in or not, doesn't matter. You'll come to just a text field eventually where you could say, you know, Iona Presentation College, because that's one of the names I can see, dash, here's one of the things we're doing really well. And then I'll share them up on the screen so we can have a bit of a look at what's going on. So go to, there's the link in the chat. Thank you, Andrew. Let me just chuck these up here so we can see them coming in. So someone has STEAM project, robotics, VR, 3D printers, etc. So put your school name, then a dash, whatever it is, so that we know which school is inputting things. Baronga Public School, great PD program for staff. Excellent. Good to hear. It's often a tough challenge because time is money in schools. So releasing teachers is not always an easy thing to achieve. So Clonard College, OneNote Teams making learning accessible from home. Nice. Use of Teams for all staff planning, organisation and collaboration at Al Amin College, I assume that is. Kennedy Baptist College, access to a variety of IT resources. Excellent. Clonard have got a visionary IT leader. Perfect. Toowoomba East State School, NAPLAN Online is going well. Remote learning as well for someone. Murray High School. Virtual whole school Zoom assemblies. All right, good. Certainly become more the norm. Melbourne, I think that's Grammar School, Grammar College, Melbourne Girls College, I think. Team saved us in remote learning. Melbourne Girls College, yep. OneNote for curriculum delivery, students and staff and Teams use, nice. And there'll be some people on the call who sort of haven't been exposed to OneNote and the possibility of that. William Stimson Primary School, resourcing to support coding, robotics and lots of other things. All Saints, comms, the right message in the right places for the right people, nice. So helping people get clarity about use Seesaw for this, use Facebook for that. Lashnau, that's probably wrong. Catholic Primary School, STEM program for all classes, iPads and crime books, that's an awkward expression, available for class sets. William Stimson, Lego and robotics, Zoom calls, remote library, etc. OLV, SharePoint pages for sharing notes. Communicating with staff using Teams at Toowoomba. Iona, excellent resources and infrastructure, good. One-to-one devices from years 3 to 6, good. Transition to cloud technologies, excellent, delivering great PD. Christchurch Grammar School, which I assume that is in WA, blended learning and PD and remote learning and mixed reality and machine learning and lots of different things going on, farm beats, etc., etc. So there's good stuff there. And Marsden High School, That might have been the one from before, maybe 3D printers and robotics. Willingness to embrace technology. That's a good one. Thanks, Alameen College. I didn't know where you were, so Perth, good for remote learning. Hopefully you don't have many more times where that is required, well, for any of us around the country, but it's a bit tough at the moment, as we know. Illawalla Primary, staff willingness and being teacher driven. Nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to whack that out of the way and continue on. But thank you for sharing. Because it's good to be able to see what other schools are doing and learn from other schools as we go through this kind of thing too. So keep the sharing coming when the time comes, or put in the chat things if you'd like to. If you'd like to have a discussion about something, by all means, just use the chat to do that. And of course, just let us know if you want to make a comment or you want to ask something in the chat, and we'll unmute you and away we go. So obviously, in creating this sort of vision for where you want to go with your technology journey, it's important that you've got, sort of everyone on the same page, everyone understands where the path is going, what you want to achieve as a school, and that's part of what we're doing here today. Very quickly, in schools that sort of, don't have a very strong reputation for technology, often on the bottom left-hand side is what we see, and that is that no strategy quickly becomes the strategy. The strategy is we do a bit of everything here. And most of the time what we see is that doesn't work very well. It might be nice because everyone gets a sense of freedom to run whichever direction they want, but often you find a disparate lack of focus around what it is that your principal or leaders are talking about at staff meetings. I say around ICT PD or PL, if you're doing a professional learning experience around ICT that is not linked to what the principal or the assistant principals are talking about at a staff meeting, it's destined to fail. Because ICT should be the vehicle through which you can improve whatever those things are. And so keeping those together is really important. And so while in many schools what we have is e-learning coordinators, and many of you will be e-learning coordinators in the virtual room, it's really important that there is also a tie direct back to the school's strategic mission and the school's strategic plan and the 1 year and 3 year implementation plan, or the charter, or whatever else. Because if this technology is not driving your learning agenda, then we need to ask, why are we bothering? Because it's probably expensive and more annoying. So we have to kind of keep those things in mind as we work on that. And so people say to us globally, well, what are all the things I should think about? How do I know what to think about? Or what if I miss something? And so this was created with about 70 global educational researchers and professors and people from the OECD and UNESCO, and it basically looked across, because Microsoft works with a lot of education systems globally and a lot of schools, and looked across all of the schools and systems that we'd seen, and tried to create some kind of a framework of a visual to say, these are the things that if schools or systems get right, they usually have greater impact. And so it's not a tick everything off list. It's not a, deep dive into every part. Is not what we're doing today, but it's a nice little checklist or framework for you to have a think about. And it's broken up into these 4 areas: leadership and policy, teaching and learning up the top right, student and school success down the bottom, and then the orange one is really the more techie enabling piece. And so really there's lots of different aspects of, well, as leaders, you will influence pretty much everything that's in there, whether you're calling that out explicitly or not. And so it does give you kind of a 360-degree view of kind of the things to focus on. And I should say there's a link down the bottom there that you can you can have a look at this. But also you've got some handouts and stuff in the folder, which I'll take you on a tour of in a second, so you know what's in there. And the idea of that sort of framework is to bring everyone to the table, have some sort of shared language. Thank you, Andrew. Something where you can start to compare or think about, and have we missed something? Let's just check that out. It's not the only framework in there. It's only one. But if you come to each of the 4 different quadrants, the main hexagons, then leadership and policy is these 4 things here. And I'm going to give you a copy of all these slides. So if there's an activity that we do today, you think, I'd like to modify that and do that with staff, or I'd like to go back over and look over some of these slides, I'm going to give you a copy of all these. So you don't need to worry about noting stuff down or whatever. But vision for change is important, having a strategic plan and a change management plan. Change management is something that is not done very well in schools in a formal sense. Continuous improvement and culture. and community engagement and partnerships. Who are we working with in the community, or companies that we're working with who can really drive our success in our technology? If you think about these questions, which we're not going to go through now, but they might be interesting reflection questions if you find an area you're interested in later. To what extent does your organisation incorporate the opinions, feedback and needs from educators, leaders, parents into the overall vision, strategy and plans? So there's lots of different sort of guiding questions or things that might prompt some thinking. Teaching and learning is the second one of those quadrants, and it's student-centered. Curriculum assessment's important, devices for learning, and then the spaces in which you do learning are the 4 sub areas of that. Again, there are some opportunities to have some discussions around this and to do some deep dives, and we'll touch on some of these ideas today. Intelligent environments is the bottom left. This is the more techie part of it. Hybrid learning, though, is this idea of having a technology platform which is going to enable you to get the best out of technology-rich learning as well as the best out of face-to-face learning. Now, obviously, in New South Wales, parts of Queensland at the moment, there's a fair few students learning from home, and they're using that technology platform, whatever your platform looks like, to support the whole learning journey. When students are in the classroom, they will use it for parts of the student journey, and we'll talk about that as we go through. IT managers and school leaders are focused on security and privacy and making sure that the network's safe and doesn't get hacked and da-da-da-da-da. Optimizing school operations, I'll talk about an example of that as a best practice in a second. And then this area here is probably one of the most emerging trends we'll talk about later, which is the use of analytics for things like learning analytics and data analytics. And there's some pretty exciting work being done in that space. Again, some guiding questions that we are not going to go through today, but you'll get a copy of these slides to be able to have a look through. And the last of the 4 is about student and school success, other stuff that really, really impacts success. And one of them is PD, of course, or professional learning on the left-hand side. But that is for everyone, every part of your community, your adult community in your school. When you think about this one here, this is more about student skills. What are the skills that they're getting? What are the skills students are getting to go out from school and thrive and be successful? This has become increasingly important globally. Even before the pandemic, it was becoming on the agenda. And so, for example, LATAM was one of the regions in the world which improved most in NAPLAN in the last global, not NAPLAN, PISA studies. And they're not doing NAPLAN. In the PISA studies, and one of the reasons they were improving, they put down to the fact that they were explicitly teaching social and emotional skills to kids and getting them really focused on themselves and how they can be better learners and how they can be happy and safe and all those things. And of course, this one is really, really important for us at Microsoft, and it's about making sure that every student has the ability to learn and be supported by technology tools. And again, some reflection questions and some possibilities. So what I'm going to do for the next half an hour is kind of go big, look at some stuff that's happening globally. What are some big trends in education? Some of that sort of bigger thinking to get the juices flowing, get the creative juices flowing. So when you get to the point where you can do some planning, you can start to be aspirational in your thinking about what you want to achieve. And so the world pre-pandemic was already changing pretty significantly. And because we're in this right-hand one now, which is called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And really the Fourth Industrial Revolution was talking about the fact that, there's a blurring between the physical and the digital in our lives. And, if you leave your phone at home now, even while you go up to the supermarket, you kind of feel a bit lost. And there's this always connected and always on and always, be able to be communicated with, and often I want to be communicated with too. And so that has a massive shift in not only education, but also global economies and what we're seeing around the world. For example, one of the things that we often see is this idea of, technology is going to be replacing jobs, and it probably will, but there will be other jobs created alongside that. And the real trick here, the secret sauce, is working out what jobs are going to go away and what jobs are going to be coming.
Travis,
because we don't want to be preparing people for jobs that are going away.
You go too far for a second. There's a big echo that just came out of nowhere. Looks like your speakers, maybe something coming from your end, because everyone's muted here, but it just...
Is my sound bad?
It was. Now it's gone. Whatever you did there, it's perfect again.
Okay, maybe it's because I have my hand doing something weird. Let me know if it happens again, though. That's
Yeah,
that's good
absolutely. It
call.
only happened for a second, but I figured I'd jump in there before it gets
Thanks, mate.
too deep. Thanks.
So some data and research around this are talking about 47% of all jobs being automated by 2034. And so there's a fair bit of scaremongering going on. It doesn't really put the other side of the argument, which is the amount of jobs that are going to be created, which they say is going to be about 50%. So it's going to balance out. And it's not the first time we've seen it. So this is New York. Many of you will have stood beside that building, probably not then, but the Flatiron building in New York, you might be familiar with and have a photo of, like I do. But this is a picture of that street in 1905. And at that time of the in New York, it took 100,000 horses to keep that city running. And so everything from those little tram carriages to the vehicles people are moving things around in, to all of that infrastructure, the bricks, the steel, the everything that went into those buildings was probably carted in by horse at that time. And then in 1925, 20 years later, which is the equivalent of what, 20 years ago is not a long time, it now sort of looks like this. And so the main change is, of course, the fact that the horses are gone and the cars are in. Now, the reason I raise that is because 25% of the country's agricultural production used to go into feeding horses to drive their economy in America. 25% of everything they grew was to feed the horses. And then suddenly this thing called the automobile comes along, and the combustion engine and everything else. And we see a massive shift in the tidal wave of jobs disappearing of everyone who supported that agriculture and everyone who supported those 100,000 horses just in New York City. And so it is, it's circles and roundabouts, swings and roundabouts. Things are changing again as we see our current fourth industrial revolution. But we just have to be sort of a little bit tempered with our view on this and understand that it is not going to be sort of, Jetson style immediately going to flying cars. We know we're having, a slow journey towards autonomous vehicles now, but it's a slow journey. And so, here's an idea of a technology that was thought was going to be impactful. This is a little robot that goes around a car park facility at a university or at a shopping center or something like that. And when it sees something that's a bit sort of dodgy or off, or someone hanging around in a dark corner or whatever, it gets amber eyes. And then when it sees something's really dangerous, it goes to red and might start to think about alerting authorities automatically. And we thought, oh, this is going to be really interesting. And we were promised flying cars, and instead we got robots that couldn't tell that there was a pond there. And so they disappeared into the pond, and, the circuits all got stuffed. And so we just have to keep in mind that while there are some massive changes around the type of kids that are coming into our schools, we have to realize that there are going to be some really positive trends and there are going to be some negative trends associated with this. And we have to make sure that these kids are prepared for their future. And this is one term which I don't really love, but that talks about the idea of youngsters being unwilling or unable to draw a distinction between their physical world and their real world. And their digital world. And if you think that's not true, then think about the next time a 15-year-old boy or girl comes to you and says they're being bullied online. Just tell them to shut down their social media profiles. That'll be fine, because that's the way to stop it. But the reality is, it's the way that they identify, it's the way they create their sense of self, it's the way they communicate. It's so much more than what it would have been for us back in the day to just sort of switch that off for a while and have a break. And so one of the dangers with thinking about kids like that is this expression of digital natives and digital immigrants. That piece of research that was done by Penske years ago. This is a piece of research that's done called the International Computer and Information Literacy Study. And it's actually done across 42,000 students in 14 countries. And it dispels the myth that just because a kid has grown up with technology, they're good at actually using it. Because we have to be still mindful that in education, our job is to educate. And our job is to actually educate people to use technology for purposes that are going to be used in the real world, which may well, the students will come with a certain set of skills around being able to Instagram, or heaven forbid, create a TikTok video, or, be able to post something on social media, or be able to do a quick Google search or something like that. But this study sort of delved a little bit deeper, and only 2% of kids in this study were able to work independently with technology to gather and manage information and do so with precision and evaluative judgment. This is year 8 kids, where we would probably think that if the digital native thing was true, we wouldn't have to teach this stuff. And the reality is that we do have to teach this stuff, and we do have to make sure they can do it. So I used to work at Monash Uni, and we would have training teachers, and we would have teachers come through who were very, very proficient at using technology themselves, but had not one cracker of an idea of how to teach with it. How do I integrate it into lessons? How do I exploit that technology, not about teaching, but more about learning for my kids? No idea. And so we can't just assume that because we're good users, that we are good teachers or that kids are good learners with technology. And only 19% of kids in this study could do it without evaluative judgment. So we do have a bit of a challenge here, and we can't forget that our responsibility in education is to also teach the kids the vital skills around technology, not assuming that because they're those digital sort of kids, they're just going to be okay, just let them fly. And then we had this pandemic thing where we've kind of oscillated around this circle of responding to it and going online, which they're doing again, unfortunately, in Brisbane at the moment, where you was preparing for another period of remote learning, hopefully not for long. And then recovering is sort of coming back into schools, which we've done several times. I'm from Melbourne, so we've done that 5 times now. And then the real possibility out of this is, what could we do differently as a result of our learnings? And so that's the really exciting question, because we've learned so much. And there's a link here that you can download a copy of this paper. It was by Michael Fullen and the other team members of the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning partnership. And we had that commissioned about, I think it was like July or August last year, so right in the middle of the first wave of the pandemic. And they talked about these 3 phases. You know, responding to the pandemic, what did people do? How did teachers cope? How did students cope, etc. Transitioning back to schools, which we sort of did before much of the US and other parts of the world. And then this reimagining thing is the interesting part. What are the possibilities for us to take forward as a result of that? And there were some key findings and research in that hybrid learning paper. We've always known this, but it was kind of amplified during these periods of lockdown, that well-being is a critical precondition for learning. And sometimes it's better just to check in with the students and spend half an hour doing that rather than worrying about the next piece of content. We know that technology shifted in its use during that time, and it became a real method for collaboration and social connectedness and culture building. So in Victoria here, my wife's a teacher. They were remote learning until Tuesday last week again. And of course, every Friday night at after school is a social, drinks with friends from work as teachers. And so the technology became the vehicle to keep all that social connection going, as well as the learning. This idea of self-regulation is really interesting. Self-regulation is the idea that a learner knows where they start in their learning, where they've got to get to, and they can navigate their own pathway, as opposed to having a teacher scaffold every single micro session for them to get there. Self-regulation is not a skill that's innate to all kids. It is a hard skill. It is a skill that you need to build muscle in. And it's a skill that if students had, they actually went really well in periods of remote learning. Because some students said, I love this. I've got more choice. I've got more voice over what I do. I've got more control of my own time. The teacher's not telling me every step of the way what I've got to do. Only students who have this capability of self-regulation are the ones who really sort of thrive in that environment. So there was lots of different things. One of the things, and this was US data, but there was one of the things that they found is that students in the most vulnerable communities during this pandemic, 44% of them didn't log on. And this is relevant for all of us, given the number of students who have special needs in our schools around the country. 55% of students who had special needs when in remote learning didn't complete set work, because they weren't getting that level of support that they were getting before. And there are ways that we can do that sort of stuff better. Here's a really positive story to come out of the pandemic. This is a lady called Professor Sue Wish-Baratz. She's from Case Western University in the US. And she's wearing a thing here called a HoloLens, which is like kind of like VR, but it puts holograms into your environment. And she'd been working with Microsoft for years, her and her team, and she was a bit of a skeptic about creating a holographic anatomy teaching app. and it would basically put that sort of that body in situ and allow you to walk around it because you can physically see it in the room, sort of stuff. And they were doing experimentation, they were doing research around that, etc., etc. And then the pandemic hit, and they had to ship 185 of these headsets out to first-year anatomy students, and they taught first-year anatomy via hologram for the first time in the world. And so that was a pretty interesting transition, and she was pretty skeptical in the development phase of this, but they actually found that there were some pretty profound impacts. These photos here are actually real photos of a colleague of ours named Lawrence Crumpton, who lives in Sydney. And it was 1 o'clock in the morning, I think, and he was taking part in one of the lectures. So he had his HoloLens on, he could hear the professor talking in his ears, and he was actually, looking at the hologram of the skeletal system and the nervous system over the top of his physical hands. They found things, for example, like, to learn the didactics or the language associated with anatomy, when using a HoloLens versus going into a Gadaver lab, was actually reduced. It doesn't necessarily mean that students shouldn't have that experience of going into a Gadaver lab, but if you're a university, that's a pretty interesting piece of research, because what that means is that you might be able to free up time in the Gadaver lab to actually have more physio students in there, or more medical students, or more whatever students. And so there are other really positive things to come out of this. And it's a pretty interesting example, but we've seen some other trends here. And so let me just talk through these, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of them. We see a massive move in Australia and globally to this idea of schools and school systems leveraging their data for more purposeful decision making. And there'll be many schools on the call here who have started a journey in this space. There are many schools on the call here who are going to benefit from the fact that your Department of Education or your Catholic diocese has started on a journey in this space. And this is a really interesting one for me, because I actually think for the first time ever, independent schools could be behind the 8 ball. And the reason I say that is because they don't have a Department of Education with many boffins working on a project like this, which they're going to roll out to 1,000 schools. You're on your own, you're independent. And so there's a couple of challenges around that. One is, how do I find the right partner? How do I fund it? But the second challenge is that if you get into real sort of rich data analytics and machine learning and start to get to predictive, which I'll talk about in a second, how do you do that with only a data set of 200 year 12s to look at, when a system of education has 50,000 or 100,000 kids in that space to compare data for? And so there's some really interesting discussions going on in this space here, and it's going to be an interesting area as we move forward. These things here are related. Schools are looking at exploring additive models of curriculum delivery. There's a school in this country right now who's looking at creating a completely online virtual school. Starting it right now, thinking about whether they could have enrollments by kids anywhere in the world into their school. And so I won't tell you who that is, because that would ruin their strategic advantage. But there's really interesting things happening about that. There's also interesting ways that schools are thinking about, is it possible for us to get kids to do different stuff from home or more stuff from home? Because they have now the technology platform that's going to enable them to do stuff. So an example of that is the Hattie research, which is pretty old now, but looked at homework, homework having a fairly small effect size on its impact on learning. But I wonder whether that was the kind of homework I gave, which was complete these 4 questions at night because we didn't get to them today. Or there's now opportunity with the technology platforms that we've got in place and we've got stood up as a result of this pandemic to start thinking about how homework might look like face-to-face work. Why can't the 3 kids in my English class continue to write their adaptation of Romeo and Juliet from home tonight together? Like, we've got the tools now, right? We've got the platform. And so it just changes the notion of the ways that we might think about delivering curriculum, because they can have those rich experiences. They can only have those rich experiences if you've got this learning experience platform stuff sorted out. And so some schools are saying Teams saved us during remote learning. Microsoft Teams is a platform which allows you to create a rich experience for learners, whether you're face-to-face or whether you're completely remote. This is a really interesting one too. These two here are kind of together. And we're seeing in some states only a real improvement in the students' capabilities around remote learning and the way they use their technology, and also in teacher capability. But I was talking to a CIO, Chief Information Officer of a Department of Education recently, who said, who was from a state in Australia where they didn't really have a lot of remote learning. And he said, we're really worried. And you know why we're worried? Because our teachers don't have an improvement in skill here. And so he's actually thinking about what sort of programs he could run or get people to think about where they could start to make sure that their teachers in that state are keeping up with the amazing growth that's happened in many states around this country through the huge hard work of leaders like yourselves and teachers like yourselves who've done just did a massive amount of work during that initial lockdown period and continues in New South Wales at the moment, in Queensland, and up until last week in Victoria. And so obviously these things here, the skills have pre-existed, before COVID and whatever else, and these skills are really, really important, as I talked about before. Some schools are thinking about, and this is certainly the case in tertiary, but also in K-12, when you think about additive models of curriculum, you might also need to think about what does that mean for learning spaces? If I have students being able to join my school, I'm a boys' school, there's a girls' school down the road, I want the girls to join in with the boys for this specific subject. What is the experience for the room where the teacher is not teaching? So the teachers with the girls in the girls' school, but there's also the 13 boys who've chosen that subject and they're at a distant campus. Can they hear properly? Can they see properly? Is there a richness of experience? Are we using the right kind of pedagogies to engage all learners in that learning? There's a lot of focus around the learning spaces in this area. And the last one here is about using technology to improve the systems that we have within our school that are less about teaching and learning and more about back-end stuff. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. And so if we think about how this stuff fits together, down the bottom, there's obviously this platform of professional learning for teachers, and then technical training for IT staff. And then above that is all these IT systems and stuff that if you're not in the IT team, you don't have to worry about, but they're really, really important. And then up above the line there, we've got our teaching and learning stuff. What's the technology the kids use every day and the teachers use to teach with? Are we thinking about this analytics and insights bit? And I'll show you an example of that in a sec. And are we thinking about the systems and having smart systems that connect together to allow us to do some pretty interesting stuff with our data? And so this slide's just here for the people who are in the IT space, so don't worry about it, don't be freaked out. But in the Microsoft land, it's this kind of stuff, and the teaching and learning is these kinds of tools, and the systems operations is these kinds of tools, and the analytics is these kinds of tools. And if you're a school leader, not an IT school leader, you'll have no idea what those symbols mean in many parts, but don't worry about it. You'll have a copy of these slides to have a look. And obviously in the IT days, they'll talk about these in a little more depth. So I wanted to touch on this one here. This idea of school operations and processes. We are seeing a massive trend for schools around the country and globally to work out how they can have smarter back-end systems that all talk to each other and automate stuff so teachers don't have to do so much administrivia. And so if you think about the idea, and everyone probably on the call has done it, organising an excursion can sometimes be a nightmare. It's just legit. There are so many logistical steps in something so small, or what people think is so small, to be able to organise a couple of buses, get some forms out to some parents, get some consent forms in. Then there's things spiral out of control when there's not updated medical plans and when kids have got special needs, and all of those things just make it really, really challenging. And so sometimes there are some schools who are looking at redesigning systems in their school from an operational standpoint, to start thinking about how they can do stuff better. This is from an independent school in Victoria, who's worked with a partner of ours called Fusion 5, a technology partner, to start building out a better parent portal. Now, this school uses Synergetic, which some of you on the call will know about, but it's a student information system, like a Maze or a Cases 21 or whatever. But they're actually building out a much better parent portal experience, because they know in a large independent school that the key customers are actually their parents, and they want their parents to have a great experience, whether they're beside the netball court, or they're down at the shops, or they're they're away for work or whatever. And so single log on, drop down, choose which one of your kids you want to look at. Giving consent is easily done through here. But down here, there is a medical plan for each kid. And if your medical plan is not up to date, then this won't allow you to give consent. It will say to you, you've got an expired medical plan. There's the possibility of doing things like allowing for a different guardians to pick up students for 2 weeks because mum and dad happen to be away, and Auntie Beryl's going to come and pick them up for 2 weeks, but you need that in the system. And, there's lots of different functionality here that they're working on. To do things like combining one calendar view for a parent to see all of their 3 children in that school and what they've got coming up for the next month. Really, really useful, but doesn't really exist in a lot of tools. Parent-teacher night. The other part of it is events management. And so they're thinking about how can we take legwork off teachers who want to do a simple thing like running a parent night for a school camp that's coming up. And it falls on a teacher who's already too busy, usually, to do that. And events management is tough, right? There's the comms, there's communications part, there's the booking the rooms. You're going to have some drinks as well. You need catering. There might be buses involved, depending on where you're having this thing. There's lots of different aspects of this. And streamlining these back-end systems is something that they're using technology to do. And that is only this bit and this bit. And so there's a big trend at the moment that schools are thinking about, how can we make this stuff smarter? Instead of using disparate systems that are sticky taped together, or in most cases not even sticky taped together, so that system doesn't talk to that system. As an example of this one here about events management, they're even talking to the local bus company they use and seeing whether with a push of a button, the buses could be automatically booked so no human has to spend 25 minutes on a phone. And so, there's ways they're sort of thinking about that stuff. So back to this, because I want to move on. Let's talk about what we're seeing in this space here. And this is a really emerging space. And as I said before, I'm going to show you some examples of what is going on. This idea of using data more effectively. Because we've been doing technology in schools for 100 years, and there's been huge investment in lots of different types. But believe it or not, probably none of them are going to have as profound an impact as these 4 here, which is lots of computing power, sitting in the cloud, and being able to use really powerful algorithms and big data. Because it means that teachers don't have to be the ones who crunch big amounts of data anymore. And therefore, it means that we can start to use data as a tool for learning. So let me show you an example of that, and then talk about show you some work that's being done at the moment. A little bit of information about analytics, first of all. When we think about learning analytics, there's sort of descriptive analytics. What happened? That is in the teacher's roll book. That is in the LMS. It's like just they got 8 and they got 7 and they got 4. And then diagnostic analytics is why did something happen, which is getting interesting. I'd like to know why that kid got 7 or got 8. It gets much more powerful when we start to get up here. And that is when we can start to use advanced analytics to predict what might happen based on. And I said before that one of the challenges for independent schools is that I've only got 200 Year 12 students. So you don't have a large data set to do any real prediction about what is going to happen because the system has only seen 200 kids before. In a Department of Education, like New South Wales is massive, 1.3 million odd students, I think. They might have 200,000 points of data about this. And so then we get up to what we call prescriptive analytics. And prescriptive analytics is the idea of not only what happened, why did it happen, and what will happen in the future, but what interventions can I make as an educator that are probably going to work? And that means it's just a serving up to me and saying, hey, I've seen 1,000 kids like this before. And when these things were done, their results went through the roof. And so that's the promise of this stuff. But analytics is hard, right? Who's smarter, this girl or this girl? Well, it kind of depends the way you look at it. Or which one of these students, A or B, is at greater risk? Well, kind of depends the way you look at it, because B's got low attendance down the bottom, but they're really quite resilient up the top. And then that's just one kid, right? And you've got a class of 25, it looks like that. And if there's a couple of classes, it looks like this. And if you're a year level coordinator, then it looks like that. And if you're a school leader or principal, it looks like that. And the reality is that no human brain can actually find patterns as well as a machine across all of those data sets. And so this is the possibility of what we've got coming towards education, is the idea of being able to use systems to help us with better understanding the amount of data we've got and allowing us to make increasingly good interventions for kids. One example of that, which I always talk about, is the fact that, you know, if I'm coaching the Year 8 netball team and Jesse leaves the Year 8 netball team, I've just got to find a new Jesse, right? Because I need a goal attack. But what if the system also knew that not only would she drop out of netball, she also dropped out of the production. She was presenting at the sick bay more often than normal. Her truancy's gone up, her grades have gone down, she's having more arguments with friends. All of that data exists within your school, but if not triangulated, it's often missed. And Jesse might actually need some more support rather than just not turn up to the netball team. Here's an example from higher ed, which I'll go through quickly because it is a higher ed example I get, but the technology underneath this is available now in the K-12 space. And this guy's an absolute marvel. He's a freak. He's brilliant. His name is Dr. David Kellerman, and he works at UNSW, University of New South Wales. And he was thinking about how he could change his teaching and learning structure, but he was also thinking about eventually how he could use the data from the learning platform that he created to try and make some predictions of student performance and help them with their exam results. And so he had 500 students in his class. This is one of his pictures of his class here. First year engineering, massive organisation. UNSW have a massive engineering faculty. And he was pretty innovative anyway. He would be inking his mathematics work onto his OneNote notebook, and he would be live producing his lectures in YouTube. So students could ask questions straight down the barrel and he would answer those straight up. He was pretty good lecturer. In 2017, he chucked all of that into one platform, which was Teams, and he saw a massive increase in the amount of questions being asked, comments and whatever, probably because of that social media-y nature of chat, like, share, you know, all that sort of stuff going on. And then he bought his OneNote notebook in here as well. He shifted out of YouTube, where the data is not owned by you, and he put that into Office 365, into something called Stream. So his video lectures were now being recorded in Stream. And then he had his collaborative documents and everything else put in there. He even put his Moodle in, so they used a Moodle system. He put his high-end engineering software that he'd run in there. And basically what happened was that he had a sort of a single pane of glass learning experience for the students. But the interesting bit was that he was creating a data schema underneath all this. What are the learning signals that that students are showing? You know, do certain types of learners who achieve certain types of results do certain types of things more often than others? You know, that sort of insight was starting to be gleaned. The problem that he really had was with a 900% increase in the amount of questions and answers and stuff, they were missing them. And so when students were really reaching out for support or asking questions and they couldn't get to them because they were just going to this flood of comments, it was a real challenge. And so they created a bot. And this bot was called the Question Bot. And a partner of ours, Scott Antares, were the ones who built it. But basically, you can see what a student would do. When they went into a chat window, they would say, I have an at question. And they put the at symbol in front of the question. And that would turn the bot on. And the bot would then go, oh, okay, I can see that Andrew is asking a question and I know who Andrew is. So what I'll do is when Andrew asks a question, I'll tag his tutor automatically in it. And I'll tag the tutor so that the tutor gets notified that there is actually a question. And then the tutor will come in, answer the question or find another student answer and say, yes, this is the correct answer to this question. And the bot within 2 weeks had 200 question and answer pairs about first year engineering. In other words, it was creating logical sequences and orders of first year engineering knowledge. And so then they were able to enable the bot to start answering questions for students, but it wasn't telling them the answers. It was pointing them back to where the question was first answered. And there's a distinction there. So it was saying, you can find the answer to that question in this reference article. you could go back to this point in the chat and find that answer. They were also doing engineering, right? And so what students would do is they would upload photographs of their workbook and say, I can't do this question, because they were writing it with, with pen on a piece of paper. And so he ended up creating these workbooks with a little QR code. And when the system saw a photograph with a QR code in, it would read the QR code, and then the bot would be able to go, I can see you're working on question 1.4 or 4.1 or whatever. The other thing that they did too, because they moved their video content into Stream, it automatically creates a transcript of everything that's being said within lectures. So the bot was even able to push students back towards a lecture, towards a minute within a lecture, to find an answer. You've asked a question about Newton's second law, go to lecture 1, go to minute about 30, watch from minute 13 on. And so students would start to watch from there to find the answer. So that was pretty interesting. Then what he did was he followed those students through the rest of the year, and then he got a new batch of students in 2018, and he used the same sort of system. But he realized that what he wanted to do was get to the fancy ends of analytics and think about how he could use all that data. So I'll go through this real quick. But he created what's called a machine learning model, which is teaching a computer to understand enough about the curriculum that he was delivering so that it could start to understand whether a student was here, or here in their knowledge of engineering. They also fed this machine learning model with the exam results of the previous year's kids, 2017. And so now the system had all the data about learning behaviours and the exam results, and was able to correlate whether there was any connection between those two things. And they were able to correlate and predict with more than 90% accuracy the results for the students in that cohort before they sat the exam. And so what he had was a powerful machine model then. And so then they put all the telemetry data for the new batch of kids in and predicted their exam results 2 weeks before the exam, and automatically generated a study kit for all 500 students 2 weeks before the exam. And that meant that the students were then sort of not studying everything, but having a pinpointed study guide to say, hey, you should focus on these 4 areas, because I can see from what's happened before that these are the areas you should focus. The real question is, did it work? And his exam pass rate went from 65 to 85% in first year engineering. Now, there's a couple of caveats around that. 1, not everyone's got a David Kellerman in school. 2, it's a higher ed example, I get it, but the technology is available in K-12. 3, not all assessments are examination based. But it's a great illustration of the power of triangulating the learning signals, the kinds of activities, the kinds of questions people are asking, and thinking about how this telemetry data from the systems they're using can be surfaced up and bubbled up to start creating some interesting predictive models around performance, and then get to a point where you could start to produce things like personalized study packs. Let me tell you another example from a K-12 space about work being done in this analytics space. And this is what I was talking about before with some large education systems in Australia doing some really pretty interesting work around this analytics space on behalf of 100 schools at a time, or on behalf of 2,500 schools at a time in the case of New South Wales. But this is some work that's being done at Catholic Schools Broken Bay, north of Sydney, and EY is the partner. And they're starting to look at all of these bits of data that a school's got around all of those 5 different areas. And there is a huge amount. I know research has been done that shows 66 plus points of data about individual students in your school. And if they're not brought together and cross-referenced, then we often miss patterns and connections. And so they've done a fair bit of work about this, and working with school leaders and working with teachers across that system at Broken Bay to start thinking about, student growth and the external assessments, and what about internal assessments and how do they correlate, and attendance and other student demographics. Here's a sample of one of the first kind of dashboards they developed, and they're changing over really rapidly over time as they implement this. But there's a couple of interesting things here. This internal assessment is showing something very different to these external assessments, which is interesting in of itself. It shows that there's something going on at the moment potentially with a student. Their running records are also down. There's something happening here. We also have here these little yellow lines, which you may or may not be able to see, extending beyond the bars of red and green. And they are predictive models. And that's based on the students across that entire 100-odd schools at that year level, and making some predictions about their performance in these sorts of areas. And they're doing that because they're able to pull in data across all of these sources. What are they going to do next? One of the interesting things, and I haven't got time to show you many more examples of that, but one of the interesting things that they're thinking about, and this is an absolute mock-up prototype, doesn't exist yet, right? Is what if we could have a dashboard for the individual kid? And the student would pull in stuff like, the tool would pull in stuff like, here's the notifications that you've got out of Teams or your LMS or wherever. And here's your deadlines that have come out of Teams or your LMS or whatever. And your timetables come out of the student information system, and your calendar's coming out of Outlook. And how you're feeling today, this sort of social and emotional learning stuff is becoming increasingly popular. What are my goals? How's my attendance tracking? And then another page is how my grades trending. Am I going up and down in certain subjects? To be honest, in my teaching time, I would have loved a dashboard that showed me 25 little smiling faces of my kids, and a view like this that showed me whether they were trending up or down, not just in my subject, but in every subject. Because I wanted to know if they were just flunking this bit in my class, or is that a pattern that is less about my teaching or this topic and more about what's going on with that student at the time. And often we don't even have that, right? We just have sort of a bit of trend data in our own classroom or maybe in our own role book. And so this would also start to think about skills with kids. It starts to think about how you're comparing against your peer group. Remember, this is just a prototype. But all of this data kind of exists. It's just not being served up to a learner so they can be metacognitive about what it is that they're learning. This arbitrary notion here of applause points, which in psychology language is a token economy, where you sort of reward positive behaviors rather than punish negative, and starting to think about how students, how could we use that and represent that, and then thinking beyond, right, to get into this idea of what is it, what might we do? There's my attendance overview. What about HSC results? Could we get predictive models in here? And we know that the Diocese in Parramatta are doing some work around predictive modelling of HSC results in New South Wales. There's lots and lots of different possibilities for this kind of tool. And so this is all pretty interesting stuff, but often is a real challenge when we start thinking about the possibilities of getting started on this journey. And if there were, if you're a school who is in a system, you can pretty much know that pretty much every system in this country is now working on stuff like that in the background on your behalf. New South Wales, for example, if there's anyone from New South Wales Department of Ed here, are in a massive, I can see you there, Sue, have a massive system, right? It's huge, and it has a benefit of being huge as well as costs of being huge. One of the benefits of being huge is that, tools like Mathletics and Reading Eggs and insert other tools you use here, which all collect telemetry data and learning data about kids, which you actually can't get back as a school. New South Wales Department of Education have said to those companies, and there's about 80 of them, we're big enough and hairy enough that if we're going to buy your product, you're going to give us the data back so that we can put it into a system like this and start giving teachers a better understanding of their kids' learning. And so only systems at scale are going to have that clout. The nice thing about New South Wales doing that is that these companies will have to build the functionality to give back the data that is being collected about the students for the right purposes. They're not doing anything untoward with the data, but just give it back so that we can start to build it into our models around how kids are going. And every school eventually will benefit from that. But there's lots of different school systems doing this sort of stuff. And there are lots of different independent schools around the country, and Catholic systems as well. And there are lots of different independent schools who are starting to think about their data journey. And it's definitely a trend, and it's definitely something you should have a bit of a think about and a discussion about. I've got 15 minutes till we do an activity. So I'm going to set you an activity in 15 minutes, which is going to involve none of me, half an hour of you doing an activity, and then half an hour of lunch or morning tea time. So let's just do 15 minutes more as an input, and ask any questions or throw something in the chat if you want to. I spoke about this notion here of hybrid learning. This is kind of the idea of what does our classroom technology landscape look like? And so obviously, you know, at Microsoft, we have Teams and Office and OneNote and all that stuff. It's all that stuff, right? And let me just jump to this. This is something from Gartner this year, where they were talking about CIOs, but, you know, leaders of technology, thinking about teaching beyond the LMS. A learning management system, if you've got one, is usually a great place to manage learning. It is a great place to create tasks, have those shared, download resources, submit stuff in, but doesn't really take into account any of the activities associated with learning. And many of them don't do that very well. And that's where you'd use a Teams or something else to sort of have that sort of active learning going on. And it really starts to think about what are the kind of pedagogies that we can use to support communication, producing things, collaborating, analyzing, presenting, researching, delivering content, and getting interaction. Now, if we were to go back and we had a 3-month warning of a pandemic that would shut down every school in this country, this is the conversation we would have had. It's how do you do more than a video call and call it remote learning? Because there are some kids in this country who, through remote learning, sat in front of a Zoom call or a Teams call for 6 hours a day. And I'm not sure that's the best way we could have done it, but it was a great solution at the time when we didn't have any prep. But now we sort of think about, hey, you know, what I should have done is, you know, 10 minutes of this and then set them doing something and use these collaborative tools for them to collaborate together and, you know, all that sort of stuff, but I didn't have time, which is absolutely right. When we think about setting these up, these technology sort of tools up in the right way as a school leader or as an IT leader in a school, schools have got different set of things they want out of these, out of something like Teams or Office 365 or whatever it is. And schools want to integrate it nicely. They want to make sure teachers get some skills. They want to meet privacy requirements. They want to fit in the budget. Students just want to collaborate with everyone from everywhere on any device they want. They want to be able to get stuff all over the place. They want to be able to get things done across their, you know, their school computer or their iPad in their home or whatever. And teachers are really interested in creating sort of inspiring students through learning, having a platform that allows a variety of teaching strategies, making sure that every learner is catered for across the learning spectrum. And so having some consistency, and I'm not going to shy away from this, but having some consistency across a school is an evidence-based conversation you should have. So there are some schools, for example, who say, oh, no, we want our kids to have the best of all technology experiences at school. And those schools often don't perform as well in terms of their technology. Their teachers don't perform as well because there's not consistency. Often the 20% of champions you have in your school are happy to go with whatever. The other 80% would love you to recommend to them the way they do this stuff. And by the way, once you've recommended the way to do this stuff, don't change it for a couple of years because there are many teachers who can't, they're just catching up. They're just keeping up with this and they're working so hard to, and then the platform disappears. Oh, we're pulling that out because of this reason. And then the teachers get frustrated and fall back down 4 rungs. So we're not going to go through a lot of this next slide stuff with you guys today because the teachers are going to talk about how to teach with this stuff. But I did want to say one thing about it. Office 365 is just all this stuff in the cloud, right? But no parent at your school or no kid at your school should be running down to Harvey Norman and buying Office 365. Because they get it for free through your school. As a matter of fact, they get 5 copies for free. So if they've got a computer for their use at school and they go to mum's place because mum and dad are separated and mum's got a PC or a Mac or an iPad or something they want to use, they can install a copy on there, and at dad's place, and they got 5 copies. And this is a really, you know, boring low-level thing to tell you because we're really sick of education. You know, parents going out to the local computer shop and paying more money for Office when they get it through school for free. So make sure that you tell your community that, and they just go to office.com and they log in with their school email and they install it in 5 locations. Boring but important. So let's think of this learning experience platform stuff before we have in 10 minutes, we have our activity. Now, in many of your schools already, and in some of the schools who are here who want to sort of embark on this journey, there's this idea of Microsoft Teams. And so I'm going to show you some stuff from a school in Victoria in a second, some screenshots about the way they use it. But it can be that single pane of glass like David Kellerman used without all the amazing analyticsy stuff, underneath that you have to build. But a single place for learners to go to do their learning is actually really, really advantageous for their brain. One of the things, we had a roundtable with vice chancellors from universities during the pandemic, and the vice chancellors said to us, one of the vice chancellors of one of the largest universities in the country said to us, look, at the time the pandemic hit and we all had to go remote, basically what we did was say to our IT team, enable every platform, turn it all on. Because if they want to use Moodle, they can. If they want to use Teams, they can. If they want to use Zoom, they can. If they want to use whatever, they can. And he said that the result was that the academics had a great time, had a great experience because they could use something they're familiar with. But the damage was done to the student experience. Because while I'm doing an arts law degree and I've got 5 different subjects going on those sort of sides, I have a different way to learn for every one of those classes. And so they lost consistency and they lost student experience. And so having a simple place to go, that has some consistency across classrooms. If I was going back into a school and starting, being some sort of a DP or whatever, I would be aiming for consistency in classrooms. Now, some people might read that as like, oh, you're a dictator and you want to mandate everything. No, have a core platform that is consistent across the classroom and let people innovate on top of it. It is the way over 30 years of doing this stuff that we've seen the most success. And so you have a team there and you can collaborate on files in there. You can add your third-party stuff like your Mathletics or your WebEx or your anything else in the top of that. They can all fit in there. You can track the students' progress. You can do interactive things like gathering polls. You can post and submit assignments because it's got a little assignment sort of LMS-y feature in there if you want to use that. And if you've got a big full-blown LMS, you can turn that off. You can record virtual classes. Hopefully we don't have to, but it seems like it's continuing. Schedule meetings, have chats, co-author whiteboards. It's a single pane of glass that allows you to create a rich learning experience in one place. That's the way you should see this. It is not a disparate set of random technologies that only the best in your school can cobble together into some semblance of order. And so your teachers will go through this as well. We're not going to do it today. If you're just starting out, start to crawl. If you're a bit more than just starting out with this stuff, then go to walk. And if you're at a point where you're doing really great stuff and you want to run, then run. And so they'll go through that in a lot of detail. Here's something that I put up occasionally to leaders that says, if you see some stuff that resonates here on these sticky notes about your school, you're possibly not using your technology platform that effectively. If teachers are emailing documents around to each other to make some changes to and emailing it back to each other, you're probably not using the tools very well. If students are confused about how they learn in teacher A's classroom versus teacher B, there's probably some consistency challenges there. If people are still storing files on their computer hard drive or, heaven forbid, their desktop, and their computer fails and it's gone, then that's not very good management of information. If remote learning was or is just a video call, then there's opportunities. And so let me show you some examples. I'm just going to flick through this. If you don't know what Teams is, there's lots of stuff and your teachers will be able to guide you once they've done their hands-on training. Don't freak out about this. I know many of you are already using it. But there's also some references, see that link at the top here? A great simple, like 8 pages of PDF you could print out. It looks like these screenshots here, aka.ms/Teams Edu Quick Guide. And it's really just it's a shortcut to get people started with, what is this thing? What does it look like? And how do I do the basics on it? And so I've got a copy of that as well in the files, which I'll take you on a tour of in a sec. Here's an example of a Year 9 maths teacher's classroom. And I'm going to talk about how she structured this classroom in a sec. This was during a period of remote learning. And so you can see here, she's got her Teams window, and we're just talking about this little class here, which is MAA11 in Nine Maths with Miss Mitchell. And across the top of that, she's got a structure here where posts is what you can see now. All of this is discussions between the teachers, sharing resources, kids asking questions, all of that sort of stuff. There are shared files here for the students to work on. The students in that school are lucky enough to have a computer with a pen in it, which we'll talk about later. So this is where their notebook is. That's where they do their mathematics work, and it's all in the same spot. They would use assignments to send out tasks. They have their grades all organised here. Every teacher at that school was asked to do a weekly planner of learning for every subject during the remote periods of learning, and that was pinned to the top. This little plus here is your absolute friend, because it means that your Teams window can have other stuff pinned. So let's say I'm looking at the Sydney Morning Herald this morning, and there's an article I want to talk about with my geography kids in Year 7. I just pin the article to the top, like literally the web page. Get them to do the reading. They're not jumping out all over the web. I'm not sending them to Sydney Morning Herald to be bombarded with advertisements. I'm just bringing that article to them. They read it. We have a discussion about it. And at the end of the lesson, I right click and go remove. And so this becomes a fluid sort of interface for me to add stuff in for certain activities and take stuff off. And so some other things that this teacher's done too. Notice here there's a channel with a blue squiggle over it. One of her students in Year 12 suffers from like the worst anxiety that you could ever imagine in a human. And so this private channel was just between the teacher and that kid. And it was the opportunity for her to engage that student, because there is no possible way that he would put a chat in or that he would open his mic up and ask a question of his teacher during remote learning. But he was able to converse with her in a private channel when he knew it was just about the teacher and him. And so here were her live lessons that she was recording, and they were all sitting there ready to be consumed by students. And when they did look at one of those videos, you can see here her sitting in the bottom right-hand corner, all her kids there at the bottom. She was able to write on her screen because she had a stylus and do the mathematics with a share screen in and then record it for later on. You can see here that here's the guide, what's it called, weekly planner. And it's pinned always across the top. And when the teacher updates it, they just say, I've updated the weekly planner, the kids know where it is. But you can see here that they're also integrating MathSpace here, which is a tool. Poly, which is a tool. Insights, I'm going to talk about in a second, which is sort of some analytics that's going on. And so the idea is that that window becomes the place where all of those students do their learning together. This is an example of a staff team. So here's the math staff. And you can see here that there are 10 hidden channels for that teacher, because she only teaches Year 12 further and Year 9. And so she doesn't need to worry. She doesn't care what the Year 11 teachers are talking about. She doesn't care what the Year 7 team are talking about. She only really teaches Year 9 and Year 12 further. So she has those pinned and the others hidden. And then here's all the assessments and things, files they're sharing, and there's a chat for them and da-da-da-da. So let me just show you for a couple of minutes before we go something that's being built into the product. And that is this thing called Insights. One of the challenges we have is that we don't have Dr. David Kellermans on our staff, right? But Microsoft are actually working with educational researchers and designers in the background to bring some of this insights, some of these data points forward for a teacher just within the tool. So this is an example of, a remote learning period where I'd like to know what Juanita was doing, and when she was doing it, she was active here, she was active here, and she was active here. And if I hover over that, here's what she was doing at that time. What's the average grade across this class? How much are they handing in? What's the conversation history like? What sort of digital activity are we seeing? This is analytics being brought up. It gets more powerful when we start to put it in the context of the way that a teacher thinks. So have a look at this little suggestion card here. It says, Ella Taylor hasn't started her comedy of errors task yet. Now, in a traditional classroom, I would have given out the handouts about the comedy of errors task, or maybe put the documents on a portal or something. And then I have no idea whether she's started anything. And I hope, if I'm checking in with her, if it's a task we're doing in class, I'd know, but if it's not, I wouldn't have any idea. But the tool does know that this student has not even clicked on any of the resources, any of the files, or opened the assignment, and it is telling me that maybe you might want to just click here and message that student to say, how you going? Do you need some support with that? You know, 40% of students are working late at night in my class. There's insights that are coming in, and there's a huge richness of these being developed into the product based on teacher feedback. So watch that space in Teams. It's just something that is in there, and you can pin insights, and only teachers see it to get some additional information about your learners. We are not going to go through this Teams planning template, but if your school, because your teachers will do some work on this, but if your school is going, oh yeah, we kind of, this Teams thing's interesting, that's what we're here to try and set up, there are some gotchas about setting up Teams. For example, just saying everyone set up a team and call it whatever you want is not the answer. Having some structures around, you know, so this template is in the files and I'll show you where it is. You know, what's your team name going to be? It's the English faculty. Who's going to be in charge of it? The head of department. Who else is going to be in charge of it? Because you should have 2 owners of a team. Who's going to be in that team? All the English teachers. What kind of team is it? It's an anyone team. How am I going to structure the channels? They happen down here. So doing this on paper, there's a couple of worked examples there, is what I would really recommend people do. Let me show you where that is, but remember your teachers will do some activities where they will have a talk about that at one of their workshops. This is the folder. This is a live folder. So this is the aka.ms//STP leaders folder. These are the files that you should have downloaded, but up here is a folder called Teams Planning Template. So you just go to that link. Let me just put it alongside so you can see what it actually looks like. So go to Teams Planning Templates, and then this is a blank Word document of that. You can change it, customize it. It's just a blank Word document for you to download. And these 2 files here are the examples that I showed you that are all filled in with some examples of team structures from schools. I would recommend seriously that you think about naming conventions, how many teams you need. More teams is not better, but too few teams is a problem. So for example, you know, and it's different between a primary school and a secondary school. You know, in a primary school, you might have a year 6 team for teachers, where the year 6 team collaborate on their curriculum together and their resources and what they're going to work on and have their team meetings in there and all that stuff. But in a high school, you're not going to have a year 7 team. You might have a year 7 team, but really you need a year 7 English channel, probably within an English faculty team. And so there's some nuances around the structure of that to think through, but your teachers will get some time to do so. And that is all in this Teams Planning Template folder here. All right, I'm going to let you do some, how much hassle is it to restructure? Good question, Sue. Yeah, it is a little bit of a challenge. You can do some renaming and stuff, Sue. So the question in the chat there is if we've gone down a pathway of going free for all, and then how can we wrangle it back? There are some restructurings that you can do. So you can do some renaming and some tidying up and some retiring of teams and consolidating together and whatever. And so our make sure you get your make sure you get your teachers who are going to the sessions with our learning delivery specialists to ask that question, and they'll be able to give them real guidance on how to restructure that sort of stuff. The only thing I would say is that sometimes when you do too many name changes, you can break some links in the background to SharePoint document libraries and stuff, because behind all this is SharePoint happening that you don't have to touch. But so it is cleaner to get it right from the outset, but you can definitely do some changes. So get your teachers to ask that question. So it's a good one. Okay. Now, in that folder, here's the activity that we're going to do. And this is going to go for 55 minutes. Well, it's going to go for 25 minutes, and then you're going to have some lunch or morning tea for half an hour. In the shared folder, let me put it back up. There is a file here called ETF for School Leaders Workshop. And within there is a file which looks like this. If you've got it printed out, it's the one with like 7 or 8 pages with like a rubric and sort of stuff on it. You can just open it up and have a chat and a discussion and take some notes if you want, if you don't have that printed out. But I'm going to give you 25 minutes now before you go to lunch. You can spend longer or shorter if you want. You can navigate your own way through this. But let me just explain what this is. The first page here is a section about educator and leader and ITPD. So that might be an area that you want to focus on. And if you want to focus on that, have a tick down the bottom here about things that resonate with you at your school. Do we use training and mentoring? Do we, it's just like a bit of a self-assessment. And it's a self-assessment across level 1, 2, 3, 4 here, across a rubric as well of what we're doing in that space. If you don't want to focus on professional learning, the second 2 pages are about strategic management, strategic planning and change management. The third 2 pages are about community engagement and partnerships. And the final 3 pages, because teaching and learning is important, are focused on teaching and learning. It's a choose your own adventure activity. What I mean by that is you are going to choose 1 or 2 of those worksheets to have a discussion about with others in your team or in your school, or do individually. You can choose, you might just want to choose 1 of those and go crazy and think about it a lot. You might want to have a crack at all of them because you think they're all important. And you're going to tick which ones you think are important for your school in the first sheet. You're going to take the assessment rubric, and then you're going to define actionable steps to reach your desired outcome. And so that's in this section here of the worksheet, is where you would say, right, I think with my initial cut of thinking, and we'll do more activities later on today, these are some of the things that I'm thinking based on what I've heard today, what we've been thinking about, where I want to go as a school. These are some things that we sort of need to do next, I think, at this stage. And so after the break, we are going to come back and I'm going to see if people will share just a couple of the actionable insights, the actionable steps that they're going to take next. So your job for the next 23 minutes is to choose 1 or 2 of those, take the little assessment and think about some actionable next steps. And then we're going to come back and resume. So I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to go on mute. I'll be here for about 5 minutes while you get started with the activity, and then I'm going to grab some lunch. We're going to come back at 1:30 Melbourne, Sydney, Queensland time. So until then, you've got time to work on that little activity together. Make sure you take half an hour off for some morning tea or lunch. You can stay on the call. You can just turn your camera off and turn your mic off. The call will stay live. And I'll be here for the next 5 minutes if you've got any questions. And then we can all get our activity done and have some lunch. And at 1:30 Eastern time, we will resume our session. Any questions in the chat?
All is well so far. I'm just going to enable their microphones to Trav right now, just in case someone wants to yell something out while you're there in the next 5 minutes.
No worries. Okay, I shall leave you to it. The worksheet is in the shared folder here, and it is this last file here that we're talking about today for this activity. So take 21 minutes or so to have a crack at that. Grab yourself some lunch and we'll see you back at 1:30. I'll be online for the next 5. See you soon. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you've had a bit of a break and a bit of a think around that first activity. So we are going to crack on. We'll be done in about an hour and a half, so hopefully we'll be out of here by 3 o'clock Eastern time, 1 o'clock Perth time, giving you the rest of the day to get some things done. So I did want to have a bit of a reflection. I'd be interested if people could respond to Doug's question in the chat, because he's asking for a bit of input from the other schools. He's asking about whether or not schools have been mandating the use of Outlook desktop version for email, or whether they go to the browser for email, because there's a bit of inconsistency between them, and also about OneDrive as well. So I'll give my opinion on that, and then but by all means jump in, because I think Doug would love to hear from other schools about what you're doing. The Outlook version that is online in the browser, to Doug's point, is actually the first version to get new features. And that's because it's native in the cloud, right? It's a cloud-based application. The bit of software which I use every day called Outlook is more of a traditional sort of installed on your computer piece of software. And so it's a little bit, it's updated iteratively to get those updates. I think it's a choice between the two. I know Megan on our team, who Andrew works closely with in New South Wales, she always uses just the browser version. So the quick answer is it doesn't really matter. However, the deeper answer to that is I think it would be good to suggest consistency across the school. But it doesn't really matter. But the only reason is that then teachers can help each other, students can help each other. It doesn't matter which way you go, but they can help each other out when everything looks the same. The OneDrive one is a little bit different, because OneDrive is your storage of files in the cloud, and you get lots and lots of space in there to store files and to collaborate on documents and all that stuff. But then there's a synchronization client that brings your files down. So if I was to show you my version, so here's my computer and my files. See, I've got this OneDrive over here synchronized. That is all of my cloud-based files that are sitting on my machine as well, so that if I'm ever offline, I've always got the latest version. But I know that any presentation I open from there, here's the presentation I'm working on at the moment. You can see there's a little synchronization icon here. So I've got this PowerPoint open, I'm making changes on the fly. It's always synchronizing up to the cloud. So you use the OneDrive in the browser if you want to sort of look at all your files sitting there in the cloud. Generally speaking, I have it synchronized using the client to my machine, and I just work on it like it's a file, like it's a folder of files on my desktop. So that's the way I do it. But yeah, so Sue's written, yeah, there was a cyber attack on DOE and the desktop saved me. I was able to access my emails. So having that desktop client meant that, well, she couldn't log into the browser version. She had a synchronized version of all of those. And that'll reconnect. If Sue had sent 10 emails that day, they would have reconnected and synchronized out as everything came up and running. Yeah, and Sue's also saying she's got the OneDrive synced, and it seems to work that way. So feel free to jump in. Anthony's mentioned there that some people committed to the browser and others use Outlook. We tend to support both with the hope to remove any blocks to checking email. Good one. So any other ideas, throw them in the chat. So hopefully you've had a little bit of time to have a go at that worksheet. And I'm interested in getting people's reflections again. So if there's any other questions, chuck them in the chat there. Otherwise, let's do another one of these. And so the link, which I'm sure Andrew will pop in for us, is pollev.com/TravisSmith027. It's a different question this time. And the question is, what is one actionable item that you put on the bottom of your worksheet? What's one thing that you're thinking that you might do in one of those areas? So just put your school name, then dash, and then whatever that is. Because it'd be interesting to know what people are thinking about. What are you planning on doing? So the link is pollev.com/Travis Smith 027. And the question this time is different. It is, what is one of the actionable items that you had on the bottom of your worksheet that you worked on that you think you might do as a result of that thinking? So, one thing, OLV, can you remind me what that stands for? Our Lady something? I'm making it up. Explore Office 365 apps for student learning in a primary school setting. Good one. So your teachers will have a bit of a play with that as well. Tomaree High, review the BYOT policies more frequently. So bring your own device or technology. Okay, Leschenault, Catholic Primary School. I've had a second go at that. Explore how we can use Teams with shared devices. Yep, that'll work okay. Perth Waldorf School, get more staff involved in training. Our Lady of the Visitation School, thank you. Murray High, incorporate the explicit teaching of digital literacy into KLAs. Yeah, good one. William Stimson, move students from Google Classroom towards 365 for students, professional learning and staff community. Let us know if you need some extra support with that, folks. Explore the resources available through the Educator Centre. So I'll show you the Microsoft Educator Centre a little bit later on as a resource. Illawarra Primary, consistency with one platform through the whole school. Don't think that consistency means is a negative thing. It's a great launch pad for people to innovate off, but it helps you in so many other ways, like student experience, teachers being able to help each other, all of that stuff. Clonard, explore the use of Teams for whole school subject lectures at VCE level as a path to hybrid learning. Good one. Yeah, let us know if you want to add any more info about that Clonard in the chat. We can help you out because we've seen some great practice over the last year or so in that space. Alameen College, get staff more involved in understanding the resources available. Yeah, it's often a challenge, and it's a challenge for us too at Microsoft because there's so many different parts of our tools. There's just it's often hard to keep up. But we'll show you the Educator Centre a little bit later on as a place where you could go and get some training. All right, excellent. So let's push on a little bit, and I'm just going to unshare my screen for a sec and share a different screen in because I wanted to share one last bit of inputs from me before we do 45 minutes of more activities. Remember those sticky notes at the start, and we'll do some more sticky notes and we'll try and pull some ideas together towards the end. So what I will do is just share my screen in now because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, here we go. About this. Hopefully you can see my screen there. Yep, thanks, Andrew. So often what people think about is that the technology landscape, and I'll just do about 20 minutes, half an hour on this. The technology landscape and the way that we use it in schools is all about software, and it's not, because the hardware, the computers or devices you use actually make a difference. And I've been talking about this for a long while, and I've done a significant amount of thinking about it, about the role of a device with a pen in it and the impact that can have on learning. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that as another piece of input, and then we'll spend the rest of the afternoon with you doing some more planning and thinking. Often it started here where, we're trying to roll out a one-to-one program or a device program or a BYOD program or whatever. And it was like, oh, I want a tablet because it's thin, it's light, and it's easy on and whatever. But I need a PC or a Mac to do the grunty stuff. And And that was sort of where the conversation stopped. But I think in terms of students, there's this third element here, which is actually the idea of, what about the paper bit? And as I've said before, if we're trying to use technology to really enhance learning, then we need to think about all aspects of learning, all different subject types, all different ways to interact with that learning. How do we write stuff? Where do we write stuff? How is the place we write stuff connected to the resources that I get now, mostly on digital formats? And so let's just explore this idea of how you can sort of make that seamlessly work. I won't rant on this too long, but some people often say bring your own disaster. The worst form of BYOD, in my opinion, is just bring anything that sort of turns on and has got more than a 3-inch screen, and if you can play Snake on it, you're good. Because it implies that that's an equal tool for learning, which they're actually not. And there's some old school tech there, a first iPhone and a Kindle, and this is actually the first kind of stylus-enabled device we put into our school in 2006. So pretty old school technology there. But one thing we have to know about technology is they're not all equal, and it's not a criticism of any. That tool that I've put in a square there is a better learning device than that iPhone. It's okay. It's not a criticism of iPhones. That iPhone is a better learning tool than that Kindle, and it's okay. But actually putting a stake in the ground and sort of saying, here's the kind of devices we recommend for learning at our school, is something that I think schools should do. And so the reason I say that is because device actually matters, and it matters for the way that you can teach, and it matters for the way that you can learn. It's not a cool statement, but to argue that device doesn't matter is the same statement as shoes don't matter, until you see the 100-meter sprint and one person's wearing flippers. You know, like they've just got the wrong shoes. It's okay. Those shoes are great in water, but they're not great for running. And certain types of form factors and devices are great for certain types of things. So it's not a criticism of any. But we need to think about things like thinking. Now, I've got a psychology degree, so this might be more exciting for me than for you. But when we think about thinking, and when thinking gets difficult, research shows that people often want to shift to what we call multimodal communication formats, which means they want to sketch stuff out, take some different notes, draw some arrows, make some visual connections on a piece of paper. And all of that sort of stuff is really mirroring the way our brain works, and also enhancing our short-term memory, which we won't go into too much. So hopefully what we're doing is getting kids to think very deeply about stuff. And when you think about stuff, there's actually certain types of technology that can get in the way of thinking. And so there was a book written about this a few years ago now by Professor Sharon Oviatt. It's called The Design of Future Educational Interfaces. And it's really just looking at, you know, what kind of form factors and device inputs and stuff are good for the thing called learning. And it's full of scientific research and stuff. It's got elements of all of these areas of science that you can see in that top quote. And it goes into some detail, and I'll show you a few bits of that. But one of the things that they do know is that if you want the devices in the hands of students to support problem solving and thinking, then a stylus is absolutely crucial, because a pen and paper is a better thinking tool than a keyboard. And a digital pen and paper is even better than normal paper, because it can then allow you to interact with all the things on a screen that you're getting knowledge from. And so let's have a look at a couple of examples of that. Let's talk note-taking. Now, I realize there's some primary schools on the call, and note-taking is probably not something that you have to worry about too much, but certainly at years 10, 11, 12, it becomes pretty serious. This is a study that was done that put all learners in one room and just changed the way that they took notes and then assessed their learning. So here were the 3 experimental conditions here. The first group were told, just use a keyboard, on screen or physical, use a keyboard and take some notes. The second group, use longhand, so take some notes with a pen and paper or a stylus on a screen. And the third group were told, use a keyboard, that's fine, but I'm going to give you a hint we didn't give the first keyboard group, and that is to don't take verbatim notes. Don't try and write everything down,
because the research shows that people are fast enough typists these days to almost transcribe what is being said, not have to think about it. So they photocopy it, really. They just get it down. And so when you go into a lecture theatre and you see students sitting there behind keyboards, that's what they're probably doing. Because pretty much lots of us have sat in a note-taking environment with a keyboard out. None of us have probably ever stopped to draw a diagram, because you can't. It's just about impossible. If you tried to reproduce this graph I'm showing you to remind yourself about what this was about later, you wouldn't do it on a keyboard because it's too hard, but you could sketch it with a pen. And so it changes the notion of how we take notes. And so there were two different ways that they were assessing the impact of those note-taking strategies. One was on factual recall, and one was on conceptual application of those ideas to a new setting. And the group who took notes with a laptop through a keyboard had decreased factual recall and decreased conceptual application. The group who took notes longhand were the only group really who had any significant positive outcome, which was more factual recall, but really, really vastly improved conceptual application. And it's probably due to the things that are going on in the brain while you are taking notes with a pen. Many of us have been in a university setting, in a lecture setting, where you hear the audible groan as the slide moves to the next slide and people haven't written everything down yet. And everyone's like, oh, I haven't got all that down. What happens when you're taking notes with a pen is that you realize you can't take everything down. And so what your brain starts to do is go, what are the important bits here? What do I need to focus on? What can I capture? Is that graph the most important thing I should jot down? Is it 2 dot points out of these 18 dot points that are important here? What's the key thing I'm going to grab? Not the transcription method that usually occurs during people with a keyboard. And so by the time it comes for you to recall that knowledge, you've actually processed it once by organizing it in a different way in your long-term memory system. And so in psychology terminology, you call that elaborative rehearsal. An elaborative rehearsal is when you remember something, but you pin it to other things in your brain. And the way you do that is by using different kinds of thinking while you're putting it in there. If you haven't had to summarize it, organize it, work out what's important or whatever, it just becomes a disorganized blob in your brain. But if you are pinning it to other things, you've got more opportunity to get memory cues to get it back out later on. And so the third group here, where we were told, take notes with a keyboard, but don't take verbatim notes, actually did have an improvement in factual recall. So at the very least, if kids are taking notes with a keyboard, you should tell them about this little bit of science and say, well, I don't want you to take any verbatim notes. You can't write everything down. I'm not allowing it. Summarize it into some dot points. Think about what the key ideas are, because they did have some factual recall, but certainly not as good as those who are writing stuff down. Let's bring that to life a little bit with an example of a mate of mine who was studying medicine. And this is some of his notes. And he was taking notes in OneNote, which is just a part of Office 365 you've got. And let me find a pen color that works here, green. You can see maybe here that there is like an ECG or something that he was working on. That is a screenshot from the lecturer's notes. And then all of these other little markings he's making are what the science calls non-linguistic visuospatial markings. They are a representation of the way his brain is remembering little things, thinking about little things. What does that little bit mean? That means this, and making real connections in his brain about what this means. The most powerful note-taking environment these days, with so much stuff coming at students in a digital form factor, is the ability to get the digital stuff and then leverage writing over the top of it. There's a couple of ways you can do it. One way is that teachers in a traditional clamshell keyboard-based environment should give more handouts. And they should give more handouts and get kids to stick it in a book and write on it. That doesn't seem to happen very much because we have a real reliance and a propensity to go down the digital pathway. And so what we end up doing is just a worse job of this bit. We just go, we don't do that anymore. We don't annotate on top of diagrams anymore because it's too hard for me to do. Or I'm not going to grab a screenshot of that thing out of my Year 11 PE textbook and give it to the kids on paper so they can stick it in a book so they can annotate on it. That just seems like a lot of work. And so we don't do it. Professor Gordon Sanson from Monash University talked about these couple of ideas here: high fidelity and low fidelity. And so let me explain what that means. High fidelity is the screenshot you can see there, the structured image of that ECG. Low fidelity is everything else, including all the handwriting, all the little circles, all the little lines, all the everything else, are the low fidelity, unstructured bits that this student is adding to it. And the best way to support a modern learner is to have a combination of high fidelity and low fidelity, because you can leverage the stuff off a screen, but still do the good stuff that is involved with leaning forward and taking notes and annotating on it. Now, why do I care about annotating on top of stuff? Here's an example too of, an e-textbook. E-textbooks are great. They're better than paper textbooks because you can get sort of manipulatives, and you could move that little head around and rotate it and peel off layers of the skull, and all sort of cool stuff, hyperlinks out and videos embedded, and some cool stuff. The challenge with an e-textbook is that if you have kids writing physically on paper here and you have an e-textbook on your screen, those two worlds don't very often meet. And so what I should do is give my kids a copy of that brain to print out, stick on their paper, and do some annotating on it. And the reason we should do annotating on top of stuff is because it leads to an increase in depth of processing, an increased reflection on meaning, and increased memory performance. And so there's always a reason why we've always done that since the inception of photocopiers or whatever, is getting kids to stick stuff in their books. This is now the modern equivalent of that. But it only really works if you can do the writing and the annotating over the top of it. Let me give you another example that's not technology based. Let's imagine we were in a room together and everyone got these two pieces of paper. And we all got those two bits of paper, and we all sat there and we all had to solve a science problem solving task, and all the data we needed was on those two bits of paper. The only difference was that half of you were allowed to write on it while you think about it, and half of you are not allowed to write on it while you think about it. Who's going to perform better? The ones who can write on this and mark it up while thinking about it in this study showed 24.5% increase in solution correctness versus those who couldn't. And what it means is that all of these little things again here, all of these little lines here, these lines that are going across there, all these little words, that is all visible ways of seeing the thinking visibly happening on tops of those documents. In a one-to-one classroom, which I taught in for 10 years, 95% or more of all of the stuff I gave my kids, even back in the day, was digital. Go to the portal and download this. Grab this off your email. Here's a PDF. Let's go to this website and have a look at that. Here's a PowerPoint presentation. And so it's digital, 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 digital. And what this study is saying is that if you can't write and annotate on top of stuff while you're thinking deeply about it, you will think about it in less depth, and you'll actually perform less in terms of memory of it. So there's something to be said here for this idea of combining the digital and the physical. Let's have a look at mathematics, for example. Let me just show you something in mathematics. I'm just going to, by the way, let me show you under the hood here for a second. This is just a big OneNote piece of paper. It's just a big canvas of stuff, and it's got screenshots on it from slides and stuff off the web and paragraphs here I haven't even talked about today. And it's just a big canvas of stuff. And all I'm doing really is just zooming you around and showing you the bits that I want you to see and following my little cheat lines there between the different items. It's a great way that my brain works to organize sort of a story or a sequence of logic this way. But there's also other advantages to using sort of digital paper versus physical. Let me show you this example here. This is a worksheet, and I've just pressed on it there, and you can see, maybe you can see a dotted line around that. That's just an A4 worksheet, like old school worksheet, PDF. And it's printed here into a OneNote page, and you can see the mathematics is being done across there, and we want kids to work down the page, so there might be some down here. And then we realize that at this point here, there needs to be an intervention from the teacher. And so what you can do in a digital piece of paper is I might decide that that student needs some support with this. So I'm going to go out to YouTube, and I'm going to find an example that, of a teacher teaching the volume of a circle, sorry, a volume of a cylinder, because this is what that's about. Here's a Grammarly ad I don't want, but don't worry about that. I'm just going to copy and paste the link, and I'll chuck it onto my piece of paper. So not only does it plonk the video in, but this video is actually streaming now live from the internet. So that's a YouTube video embedded in the same piece of paper where the student was actually doing their first cut of mathematics work. And so that will now...
In this example, we're asked to find the volume of the given cylinder.
So they could go through and watch that.
And the height is 10 meters.
And I might have asked them to take some notes along the side here of the key steps, or you get the idea. There's a lot happening here in terms of psychology of teaching and of learning. One of the things that is happening is that feedback given in situ is actually really powerful feedback. So at the point in time, but it also means that feedback becomes teaching again, because now I've given them another teacher teaching that concept, which they maybe didn't get from me. And that's interesting. The other thing I've not done is I've not allowed them to click out and go to YouTube. I'm actually keeping them in the piece of paper, and that's also useful. Because this is a digital piece of paper as well, it has some other affordances, like the fact that I never would have had this student hand this piece of paper in or email it to me, because I just have access to all the kids' workbooks all the time, live, because digital paper synchronizes via the internet using OneNote. So I never have to have anything handed in. It's always live. I can see a kid literally writing in it if I wanted to. I can give feedback this way with just whacking some hyperlinks in. But there's also some other cool stuff that you can do in digital paper like this. So let's say we were working on this problem here. And I wanted to, I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to press this little maths button at the top of my OneNote. You can see on the right-hand side here that it's actually predicted what I was writing. Now, maths teachers are going to love this or hate this, but I can actually, I'm going to graph both sides of this. Oh, yes, there it is. And I can zoom in and out here. And I might insert that on the page because that might be useful for me to take some notes with later. Or I might actually want to solve this for X. There's the answer. How do I want to show the working? If I was a sadist, I'd choose a quadratic formula, but I'm not. So I'll just go to using difference of the squares method. And here is the working for that problem. I can drag and drop that on my page too. But also, if I'm a student, many students, my wife teaches mathematics at year 12, and she has a lot of international students, and the students often struggle in year 12 mathematics, not because they can't do the math, but because they can't understand the question. And so any of that literacy stuff coming into maths is a real challenge for some kids who may not be that bad at maths. They just don't know what they're being asked. So this little icon here is something that in the accessibility inclusive classroom session, your teachers will be exposed to. It's called Immersive Reader. And I'm just going to click on that. And my piece of paper changes, and it takes away all the distractions. And it now is going to let me have that read to me. It's just loading in the formulas. And so now, if I've actually got my audio showing, you should be able to hear.
Steps using difference of squares. Subtract 40 from both sides.
That is now being read to the student about what they should do. And so they can understand the explanation if they're not very high literacy. Then I can go, oh, okay, well, I want my kids to practice that. So you can see down here, I can generate a practice quiz. Here's artificial intelligence at work. Because what it's doing is it knows it's read my handwriting and sees what type of question I'm asking. It's now saying, why don't I make a practice quiz of 3 more questions? Click on that. It's building a form here, and it's going to use AI to go, I see what kind of questions you're asking. Here's the form literally being embedded into the same piece of paper. And there is going to be 3 questions in there, which I've got to solve for X, where the students might go, right, question 1, do my working over here, choose the correct answer. Question 2, do my working over here, here's the answer, and scroll down a bit. Question 3, here's my working, and here's the answer, and submit. View results. Oh, I got the first one right. I don't know how. I got the second one. I got the third one right too. I'm doing all right, 66%. So this is an idea, one like small example of the benefits of digital paper over physical paper. And so there are a myriad of different examples in different subject areas where this sort of stuff can be really enhanced by the use of digital paper. Why have I picked out these subjects here? So mathematics, science, physics, chem, art, Chinese, Japanese, and music theory. There are some similarities between these. And one similarity is that they're all really, really badly taught via a keyboard. And the reason is that they have a symbolic language. I mean, art's probably an exception, but the others have a symbolic language. And there will be many maths teachers in the room who've tried to do, created maths tests and stuff using superscript and subscript and formula bars and all that stuff, and it's hard going. But this symbolic language associated with these disciplines is much better taught with pen and paper than it is on a keyboard. But it's much better taught on a keyboard and touch device with a stylus than it is with pen and paper as well, because of all the things I just showed you. And when we think about devices, we're going to set up a technology program in our school, or we're looking to refresh ours or whatever, we actually should think about what students actually do with their devices every day. And all of this stuff on this list, whether it's highlighted in yellow or not, are examples of things kids do in the thing called learning. They write and they sketch and they summarize and they note take and they use formulas and they gather data and they take photos and they edit stuff and they, so much stuff. Everything in yellow, there's research to show it is better done with a stylus or pen than a keyboard. And so what I think we've got is a real sort of challenge around having the wrong kind of devices in the hands of learners. What about teachers? This was a study done by Monash University, and they looked at the engagement in lectures over time. You can see the timeline there back in the early 2000s, late 1990s it was. And they looked at how engaged people were in lectures and how much learning could be attributed to going to a lecture. And they found some sort of challenges. And it was sort of in decline at that point in time. And then when they did the analysis, they worked out, that this is about the time when lecturers started presenting in Keynote and PowerPoint. And so there's a few things that happened at that point in time. There's research to show, for example, that when university students say to their lecturers, can you please just give me the slides ahead of time so I can take notes on the slides? What they actually do is become more passively engaged in the lecture. And so they think, I don't have to really write everything down here. I've got the slides to look back on. And then, as you know, many don't go back and look at the slides. So they were thinking about how they could get this to go up. And it was in 1998, I think this study was done. And so they gave some of their lecturers a device with a pen in it. And they said to the lecturers, take 60% of the stuff off your PowerPoint slides and draw it in live when you're lecturing. And the result of that from the students was that 80 to 90% of students preferred it when their lecturers taught that way. 80% said it helped with their focus, and 85% said it helped with their understanding of content. And the only thing that teachers did was have a different kind of computer they could write on, and took 60% of the stuff off their slides and built the slide in front of the students using a pen. And so I remember presenting this to a school where the principal said, the other thing that does is it means that your teachers have to be actively engaged in the teaching. They have to tell the stories. They have to build the knowledge on the fly. They have to show the kinds of thinking that you want to see. And Associate Professor Sylvia Urban at RMIT did some of this stuff. You can see her teaching here. I'll zoom right in. She's got a Surface device there with a pen. She's not tethered to a cable. She's writing on her chemistry OneNote page. The OneNote page is synchronizing to her students, so they're all seeing her notes on the fly. And as a result of that, she taught the same course for 10 years. She'd never had higher results in terms of the OSI and GTS than she had that year. What is OSI and GTS? Universities get measured on these two things by students. GTS is the general teaching score, which is how good is that course preparing for me to be a whatever I came here to be. And the overall, the teaching score is the quality of the teaching. And then the overall satisfaction index is, does that course prepare me for my future in whatever field? And so by just changing the technique with which she taught, she saw a vast improvement in results. The reality is here that if you're going to pay $30,000 to go to a university like RMIT and be taught by Associate Professor Sylvia Urban, who is a brilliant organic chemist who's published a lot, then don't you occasionally want to see her think like a chemist? Because that's what she's doing here. She's not showing you slides of once upon a time when she thought like a chemist. She's doing it live. And hopefully that's what we sort of want to experience as a learner. So there are other things that we could talk about, but we don't really have time. I just want to finish with this. One of the great things about teaching with one of these devices too is that it actually enables you to reharness storytelling. And that is, this is a great storytelling tool. It allows me to get a bit of white space and take a screenshot of something and start going for it. It also allows you to do this thing that I call distraction recovery. Everyone gets distracted all the time. And as I'm putting a square around things like this at the moment, I'm actually hopefully when you come back to the room and go, oh, I got distracted, where am I now? He's probably talking about what's in that red box, and I am. It allows for real-time annotations on the fly. It allows for flexible content design where anything is possible. You get a screenshot of anything and you can turn it into a teaching artifact. And maybe what this dude is doing here is the best way to teach that concept. And so we can still do that now with technology, like we used to do it on a blackboard. My whole push on this stuff is that we should really have students using no compromise devices for uncompromised teaching and learning. You shouldn't have to not have kids do something because their device doesn't allow it. You shouldn't have teachers not do a certain teaching technique because their device doesn't allow it. You should have the full flexibility of everything. That includes touch, pen, stylus, mouse, keyboard, full software, apps, whatever. And so it all should be in sort of one sort of setup. So happy to take any questions on that. I've cut a few bits and pieces out, but I'm really passionate about it because I see this given a cursory glance rather than the attention and focus that it should be given. And I think it's really, really important. Let me just share, and I just wanted to share another slide with you here. I'll get back to my PowerPoint and share that in. Here we go. Lots and lots of schools at the moment. many of those in this session here are probably past this. In other words, many of the schools in here probably have already got some sort of a technology program for kids. Call that a one-to-one technology program, one device per child, whatever. And at primary school, it's different. Some schools go years 4, 5, 6, some go just 5 and 6. There's models of, do we let the little kids take them home, at what year levels, what kind of devices? This is being recorded, so I can't really use my line of, I didn't say this. But if I was starting a primary school, I'd probably have iPads in the little years too. But there's a point in time where I think they need to be using a computer, and maybe that's about grade 3 introduction and grade 4 on, so that they're ready for high school and they're ready for the world of work. And so one of the challenges that we have, and you can see a page reference to that book that I told you about earlier, is that this is where the conversation often starts around deploying a one-to-one program. When people want to create a technology program in a school, there's 21 steps that have been shown time and time again in systems around the world that you should think about. And sometimes what schools do is go, what kind of computers are we going to buy? And that's where the conversation starts. Now, let me, good question, Sue. I'll come to that in a sec. Let me just round that off by showing you a resource. I've been referring to this is the shared folder, right, of stuff that I've given you under that link. Under research and resources here, there are some resources that would be kind of useful if you're interested in this stuff. This Sharon Oviatt paper here is a summary of what that author's book is about if you're interested in going back over some of that research. This is the Teams for Education quick guide where I showed you those screenshots of Teams earlier. This one at the top here, if you're starting your journey to create a one-to-one program or a technology program for kids, we've put the 21 steps that you could see on the slide into 5 phases, and there's a flyer there for you. And there's other bits and pieces here that you might want to have a look through. That's under the research and resources folder here. Sue's asked a really good question that I get all the time, and that is it possible to retrospectively add a stylus to a device? The answer is yes. The caveat is, but I don't know whether everyone will use it. And so let me explain what I mean. You can plug a USB thing into the side of your device that gives you like a little digitized screeny thing and a pen. It's called a Wacom tablet sort of thing. The problem is that then it means that there's another peripheral that every teacher has to carry into every classroom to plug in to use it. So the committed will, there will be some people who really, really will. So it is possible to do that. The reality is though that also writing on something external to the screen is a different, you got to be pretty good spatially. Sometimes it's hard to work out where you're writing, and it's definitely not as fluent as writing obviously straight on the point where you're wanting to do some writing. So you can do it, Sue, but if you're going to try it, get a couple, give them to some really keen beans, and let the teachers have a bit of a play with teaching that way. But generally speaking, it's not something that's really taken off, to be honest. Greg, our regional access gap devices came with a Dell Latitudes with a stylus, some of them. So that's a possibility. Anthony, throw an issue we have at Girls College. We have an image problem with Apple is easy to no virus device where Windows is hard, devices that isn't stylish. We put in a program pen for 2 years. Each year 7 are expected to get a Windows pen laptop 2 years, 14 devices, 1,000 to go. So yeah, if you are going to go down a pathway, thanks Anthony, if you're going to go down a pathway of using stylus-based devices, the other real reality of this is your teachers need to have PD about why this matters. So for example, having teachers understand the ability to screenshot and annotate as a vehicle for learning, doing that in a digital piece of paper that automatically synchronizes with the student workbooks is so much better than the alternative, which is do it up here on a whiteboard. You can't get a screenshot of the stuff. It's not a very fluent way to do that sort of thing. Like we ran some PD with some schools a few years ago called, what was it, 5, it was like 5 tricks for teachers and 5 tricks for students if you're in one of these environments. Teach your teachers these 5 things. How do I take a screenshot and annotate it? How do I convert handwriting to text? How do I, there's 5 little tricks and then 5 for students as well. Because students should actually we should get a bit metacognitive with students who've got these devices and sort of say, here's what is best for your brain, young learners. And, sometimes schools sort of say, oh, yeah, the kids don't natively choose to use their stylus. And I sort of say, well, they should because it's better for them. And you kind of need to put that in the same column of all the other stuff we make students do that they don't like that's good for them, because there's lots of it. And we do it for a purpose. We're not just some sort of sadists as a teaching community. We do it because we know that there are benefits and we know more about them about learning, more than them about learning. So it's something that you can definitely go down the path of. And if you want any more support with that sort of stuff, then let us know. And of course, your teachers will be able to play with some of the tools, which are all sort of stylus based these days. Okay. Thank you for your questions and comments. Love it. Let's let's give you some time now, just before we do, and I'm going to scaffold this with a series of activities because we've got 45 minutes left. What have we sort of covered on this, generally speaking, right? Now, we haven't done a lot of depth, but things we've sort of spoken about. This hybrid learning bit was really about the platform, that sort of Teams environment, Office 365 stuff. We did a little bit on that, but your teachers will do more. We had a little bit of a look at some advanced analytics stuff that is coming to a school or school system near you. And I saw a little bit of an example of how schools are starting to play with this part here. Your teachers will do much more about these two here, which is the student-centered learning and curriculum and assessment. They will think about ways you can use technology to enhance those things. We just did a bit about devices for learning there. There's a whole day on equity and inclusion and accessibility and how to use these tools. I just showed you a little bit of Immersive Reader, but didn't even scratch the surface. PD is definitely something well worth considering and sharing ideas about. And of course, we're actually up here trying to work on what is our vision here and what should we do. So it's time for us to now get our sticky notes back out, because there's been a lot of inputs, right? And it's a real balancing act, this workshop, because we're not in the same room, so we don't often go down tangential paths, which we would if we were face to face. But also what we want to do is get you to reflect on what are all the great things that you're doing at your school already, because there will be many. And now's the opportunity for us to flip that over and go, given what we've heard, given what we've discussed, given where we are, where are our opportunities for improvement as a school? One idea per sticky note. Grab your second color of sticky notes if you've got two colors. If you haven't, just grab another set of sticky notes, and we're going to put a little minus in the top corner of these ones. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes again to write down one idea per sticky note. Where can we improve as a school? Before we went for lunch/morning tea, you did that worksheet with those things where at the bottom, the actionable things. You could turn some of those into opportunities for you to write something down and go, we need to work on our PD better, or we need to, consider this, or now I'm thinking about that, or whatever. Something that you could tangibly work on moving forward. One idea per sticky note, put a little minus sign in the top corner. I'll give you 5 minutes and I shall shut up. Go for it. Okay. Got to stop that. So next job, hopefully now what you've got is a couple of sets of sticky notes. Some of positive things we're doing really well, and some areas we can improve. The last set, just put little minuses on them so you can organize them, because that's our next job. What we are going to do is, and this really creates what we call an opportunity map. And it's the reason why one of the documents that you have hopefully printed out, if I can full screen that, has lots of, has the education transformation framework elements on it. And so if you've got that handy, lay that out on the table, because now what you're going to do is I'm going to give you 3 minutes to start putting your sticky notes on your diagram, on your piece of paper. So you've got all these sticky notes, some of them are positive and some of them aren't. You'll have multiple in certain areas and none in other areas. But you need to now lay those out, lay that document out. It's the one that is called ETF Elements, that has the hexagons just on one page. Lay them out on the table and then put all your sticky notes all over it. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do it. If you are working as a group or a team, you've got a couple of people in the room, then if you have similar ideas, just sort of put them on top of each other so you can see that there's multiple ideas, but it's the same kind of general idea. So I'll give you 3 minutes to organize that into an opportunity map and have a think about where the opportunities might lie. What are we really good at? What are some areas that we can improve on? 3 minutes to organize it, discuss it, and take a photo of it, because obviously that's a pretty hard thing to keep. So I'll set the timer for 3 minutes and you can go for it. Okay, so knowing, of course, that the Education Transformation Framework is a potentially arbitrary framework for you because you've just sort of heard about it or learnt a little bit about it or are still sort of seeing it for the first time, that activity is still a really useful way to just say, hey, we seem to be doing really, really well here. We're focused a lot here. We've got some opportunities over here where we see nothing or we see lots of negative examples here. You know, it's just an interesting reflection activity to sort of think about and have it organized in some way around a framework to just get an idea of where the opportunities may lie for your improvement. And similar to that, so by the way, if you've done that and you've got your sticky notes all over it, you can just take a photo of those pieces of paper so that you can whack it in a OneNote or somewhere rather than lose all those bits of paper over time. So the last thing we're going to do is kind of thinking about where do we want to take this learning so far? Where are we interested in taking our school to? There are some schools who are in the call with us today who've got really, you know, quite a long history of doing technology with students. And there are some who are sort of starting their journey. So it's not really about, you know, everyone creating the same aspiration for what you want to achieve. It's about how do you want to move forward at your school. And so there's a way we're going to do that now. And I'll scaffold you through a little bit of an activity, which gets you starting to think about what's our vision for what we want technology to look like, and how do we actually go about getting there, combining some of these ideas together. So one of the other worksheets that you hopefully downloaded is this one here called Smart Goals, ETF Smart Goals. So remember, it's in that folder. It's the second last one here. And it's called ETF Smart Goals. And it has 2 pages to it, which we're going to tackle sort of a little bit separately. It has one which allows you to write a sort of vision statement of where you want to go to for this either aspect of your transformation or this transformation. And the second one has an opportunity for us to create some SMART goals. So let's just look at the first of these 2 pages first. What we're going to do is just using this first page, we're actually going to try and get down to a point where you've got a bit of a vision statement of what is it that you've come here for and what do you want to achieve. But the way that we need to sort of get to that point is, first of all, maybe just flip that bit of paper over and just use a blank piece of paper, because I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to write down individual words or phrases that would describe what a successful technology environment in your school would look like. So just flip that piece of paper over. We're not writing on those lines yet. So for example, you might decide that you think a successful technology environment is consistent across classrooms, is embedded in practice, is reliable, is linked to teaching goals, is targeted for something, is supported by our parent community, has the buy-in of teachers, it doesn't really matter what your things are, but don't worry about structuring them into sentences yet. Just take 2 minutes to write down some words or phrases of what you think success looks like in terms of your technology environment. I'll set a timer for 2 minutes. Go for it. Just on a blank piece of paper is fine. Okay, so hopefully you've got some words or phrases that might describe what you're thinking a successful technology environment at your school might look like. The second step is, and you could use a starter like this if you want to. And this is where you use the front side of that worksheet here on these lines, and you could have a crack at sort of summarizing some of those ideas that you came up with in words and phrases, whack them into a sentence or 2 sentences, and think about how would you articulate what you're trying to achieve here? So at our school, technology will, whatever, is it going to support students too? Is it our technology will be embedded into pedagogy for blah, blah, blah. It will provide a consistent platform for whatever. You don't have to start with at our school, technology will, but you can. You could say, learning will be supported at our school by effective, da, 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 up to you. But let me reset the clock. I'm going to give you 3 minutes for this one to start seeing whether you can pull that into some semblance of a couple of sentences that you could articulate what it is that you're trying to achieve if success is yours. So I'll put 3 minutes on the clock and come back to you. Okay. Hopefully you've got some words and phrases turned into a couple of sentences that kind of start the communications of what you're trying to achieve as a school through this program. And the last thing, probably more important than that statement, is that now you've got kind of a draft, a first cut of a bit of a vision statement around what you're trying to do with your technology, is to think about, well, how are we going to get there? And so most of today, the times where you've been working on your own, has been thinking about a gap analysis or an opportunity map, which is the sticky notes. The success factors worksheet you did before lunch or morning tea was to do a little bit of an assessment of an area and think about some tangible things. Now's the opportunity to use the second page of that same worksheet. And the worksheet was called, I've lost my bit of paper here, was called SMART Goals. So this one here, you've just done the first page, jump to the second page, and you'll see a document with SMART across the top. Now, SMART goals, I'm sure you're familiar with, but in case you're not, are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And so that's what a SMART goal is. And you should think about these things that you put in the priorities box in line with SMART goals. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, you can just write and organise them under the leadership and policy, teaching and learning, intelligent environments, and student school success. I'll leave this on the screen so you can be reminded what the subparts are. But just take some time to think about, right, well, what are we actually going to do? Now, remember that this is the first cut of this, and this is only the leadership section. Teachers will go to a teacher section, IT will go to an IT section, and then you should all come back together and have a look at this, and there will be potentially different goals, more goals, other things added to this, some things removed because you're already doing them, you just didn't know. There's lots of different ways that this could be used moving forward. 5 minutes, don't worry so much about the metrics, the measurements at this stage, you can have a crack at that later. But 5 minutes to go through and fill up this column here with as many different ideas of what you might do next. You'll have none in some of them, you'll have several in the others, but this is where the rubber hits the road. This is about what are we going to do as a result of this thinking time that we've had together today. So I'll put up a timer for 5 minutes and give you an opportunity to think about that. Chat again in 5. Okay. One last bit of sharing. I'm interested for people to share, what are you going to do next? What's one of the ideas that was on your list? So I think you probably know how to do this by now. Go to that link, pollev.com/TravisSmith027. Put your school name, and then what are you going to do next? What's one of the things you've got that is a actionable thing that you are going to do? And then we can share a couple of those ideas. What are you going to do next? Okay, Tamarie High. Develop skills in using and interpreting analytics to drive teaching and learning directions and focus. Interesting. Love it. It's a big job, but you can start small. Get some of those data sets you've got together, bring them together into a tool, and start thinking about how they could inform your decision making around learning. Great one. What else have we got? Clonard, pilot a OneNote PD session for Year 7 students and focus on use of stylus. Think about some of the strategies that they should use, folks from Clonard too. What are some tricks and tips that you could help them with? What are some teaching strategies you could help teachers so that the students are exploiting it? Really good comments. Migrate all student teachers' files from server to cloud. Couldn't agree with that more. It's more secure, it's more flexible, you can collaborate on them, and it's always backed up. Upskill staff on the technology already available to you, good one. Have school leaders model the use of cloud computing, annotating documents, stylus use, absolutely. That's a good one from Melbourne Girls College too. And I think it is about baby steps with that stuff. It's about making sure that people understand what is possible and what could they do just to transform some small practices. So I was working with a school in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and I told them that bit of Monash research about taking stuff off your slides, and the teachers were scurrying off to remove stuff from their PowerPoint slides and think about how they could teach their senior classes differently by using different techniques. So once again, my suggestion for this is to really think carefully about bringing the team together, who are the ones who will, who have been part of all the different elements of this school transformation program. Leaders are one part, teachers are one part, support staff maybe, or teachers going to the inclusive classroom and IT. All of you are equal participants in sort of driving this agenda forward. What we've done today really is shared some inputs, is giving you an opportunity to do some first cut of thinking. You've got some documents you could show the teachers when they come back into you. You've got a sort of a draft of a vision statement. You've got some goals or tangible next steps, but they might be informed by whatever the other teachers bring back to the table or your IT team bring back to the table. So it's important that you have that collaborative discussion as the next part, because it's not about finishing this journey today with us in 4 hours. It's about opening up, sharing some ideas, and starting that thinking process. A couple of other things I wanted to share with you before we go. One is PD has come up time and time again. And so let me show you this. This is our educator community. And Andrew will chuck a link into the chat for you. It's free courses for teachers using Teacher Voice. So if you're thinking, oh, you know, so Clonard, they're saying they want to do some OneNote stuff, have a look in here. There's a great surface. There's actually a course in this environment here that's that's about Surface, doesn't matter if you're not using a Surface device, but about stylus-enabled practice. So you could do a course in that on this community, and your teachers can earn badges. And so if if you have a look down here and go, oh, Transform Learning with Teams, what's that? It's a 1-hour course that's free, which allows you to do these kinds of things. If you go to training and go to courses or learning paths are sequences of courses. There's learning paths on lots of different things, like creative, Minecraft stuff, anti-racism stuff, dyslexia training. There's so many different things. There's one on the education transformation framework we've been doing today. There's hybrid learning strategies. There's mastering teams for remote learning. There's so many different courses that you could do. My recommendation around this website for teachers is to not just send out education.microsoft.com to your staff and expect the world to change. It's actually, I think, about curating 3 or 4 courses from here that you think are going to drive your journey forward. So if you are going down that path of using Teams deeply in your school, then maybe there's a 1-hour course that everyone should take on that to get started. If you are going to look at that stylus-enabled learning stuff, maybe OneNote is a place that you could send some courses out. So it's a great resource, and teachers can grab badges and all sorts of things on there as well. And so the last thing to do really is to remind you about the stuff that is in this folder. And so I'll bring that up live rather than show you a screenshot. This folder has got lots of things in it. There's the 3 documents we collaborated on, but I am going to put the workshop slides into this folder, into this Monday folder, in about 15 minutes. So if you want a copy of my slide deck with all that stuff in it, then I'll put a copy of those slides in that folder there. That's where you get it, under workshop slides. And I'll also put the recording in there. There's your team's planning templates, which your teachers will do some work on. You don't need to worry about that, but that's where they are. There's also this research and resources folder with some downloadables and some bits and pieces like this Sharon Oviatt paper that I spoke about before, which summarizes some of that research around, stylus-based thinking, etc. So a couple of last resources to share. Make sure that you keep that link handy. That'll be live, so you should be able to get back in there and get the stuff. There's also the Education Transformation Framework link, the second one there. I mentioned the article from right at the start about that Michael Fullan and team put together. That is at aka.ms/hybrid learning paper, if you wanted to have a read of that. And there's free resources, of course, on the educator community that I put there. And then there's also this tool here, which we haven't talked about today, but if you're looking to do sort of an analysis of your technology as well as all of this, then that Edu Journey is a great place to start. The last link here, which your teachers will be aware of when they come to the inclusive classroom session, is one of the challenges is that lots of our technology is enabled for people who have learning challenges, but we found that schools sort of A, didn't know about those resources, and B, when they wanted to run sort of a parent night, it was a lot. So we've created a parent kit for you to be able to run a parent evening for parents to sign up and come along and listen about how the technology that you've provided them out of the Microsoft products can help their student who's got reading challenges or has got dyslexia or something else. So that is under aka.ms/ICPK, which is Inclusive Classroom Parent Kit. And with that, hopefully that's been a useful use of your time. It's the start of a journey, not the end. So bring your teachers back together once they've done their courses, and hopefully you can get on a journey to whatever success looks like for your school. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Andrew, for being the man on the links in the chat. And thank you everyone for your engagement and questions and comments today. And with that, I'll stay on the chat. We're about 5 minutes early, so that's good. I'll stay on the chat here, and if anyone's got any questions or whatever, you can ask. And otherwise, feel free to hang up and enjoy the rest of your day, and wish you all the success in the world. Thanks, everyone.
Well done, Travis Smith. I'm just going to put those links in the chat for them as well.
Thanks.
And that way they can click and explore on their way out. Just 1 second. Make sure I put them right. Excellent. All right. You're welcome. Put them in there. Great. What a great session. What a fantastic session. That was awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, don't thank me, Anthony. Trust me. I'm just throwing links in the chat. Thank Travis Smith. Did all that heavy lifting today. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Great ideas, aren't they? They're fantastic ideas.